What if the stories we've told for thousands of years, the epic legends of gods and monsters, of cosmic battles and world-shaping prophecies, were more than just myths? What if they were fragments of a forgotten reality, whispers from a time when humanity peered into the unknown and saw something truly divine looking back? This is not just a question for scholars or dreamers. It's an invitation to a journey, a quest to uncover the hidden truths buried within our oldest tales. Across every continent and culture, our ancestors looked to the heavens and the earth, and they saw gods. They saw beings of immense power, of thunder and love, of war and wisdom, and they wove their observations into stories so grand, so emotionally resonant, that they have survived for millennia. Today, we often treat these as simple fables, but what if we've been missing the deeper message encoded within them? Welcome to an exploration that will take us far beyond the pages of storybooks. We are about to embark on a voyage through 30 of the most epic legends from divine pantheons all across the globe. This is a journey into the heart of human imagination and perhaps into a lost chapter of our own history. We will walk the golden halls of Asgard with the Norse gods, stand before the sun-baked temples of the Egyptian deities, debate with the wise and flawed Olympians of Greece, and witness the vast cosmic cycles of the Hindu traditions. But our journey won't stop there. We will venture to the isolated islands of the Pacific, delve into the deep forests of the Americas, and ascend the sacred mountains of Asia, discovering gods and goddesses whose names you may never have heard, but whose stories are every bit as powerful and profound. This series is more than a list. It is a tapestry woven from threads of wonder, mystery, and sheer adventure. We will witness the raw, untamable fury of gods of thunder, whose voices were said to shake the very foundations of the world. We will get swept up in divine romances that defied fate and altered the course of empires. We will stand beside warriors in epic conflicts that decided the fate of cosmos, and seek the counsel of deities of wisdom who held the secrets of the universe itself. Each legend is a doorway, and as we step through them, we won't just be learning about different cultures. We will be rediscovering a part of ourselves, that innate human drive to explain the inexplicable, to find meaning in the chaos, and to believe in something greater. So prepare to see these ancient stories in a completely new light, because the adventure begins now. Our journey into the epic legends of the divine pantheon begins not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap on the mist-shrouded slopes of Mount Olympus. But before the gods of Greece could claim their celestial thrones, the cosmos itself had to be forged in a brutal, world-shattering conflict. We start with the story of Zeus and his overthrow of his father, Cronus, a tale of betrayal, liberation, and the violent birth of a new era. This was the Titanomachy, a 10-year war that pitted the old gods, the Titans, against the new, the Olympians, a struggle that would decide the fate of the universe. For ages, the Titan king Cronus had ruled, a deity who had himself seized power by overthrowing his own father, the sky god Uranus. Fearing a prophecy that he too would be overthrown by one of his children, Cronus devoured each of them at birth. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon were all swallowed whole, imprisoned forever in their father's stomach. But his wife, the Titaness Rhea, could not bear the loss of her sixth child. When Zeus was born, she devised a cunning plan, wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes and presenting it to Cronus, who gulped it down without a second thought, while the infant Zeus was secretly whisked away to a cave on the island of Crete. There he was raised in secret, his cries masked by the rhythmic pounding of priests who clashed their spears against their shields, a sound that foreshadowed the war to come. As Zeus grew to maturity, his power swelling with him, he learned of his true origins and the grim fate of his siblings. His first act was one of cleverness and guile. He secured a position as the cupbearer to his unsuspecting father, and with the help of his grandmother Gaia, slipped a powerful emetic into Cronus's drink. The Titan King, wretched and convulsed, disgorging first the stone, and then, one by one, the 5 fully grown Olympian gods, unharmed and ready for vengeance. This act of liberation was the first strike in a war that would engulf all of creation. Zeus and his newly freed siblings rallied to his cause, but they faced a seemingly insurmountable enemy. The Titans were ancient, vast in number, and led by formidable figures like Atlas and Menoetius. The war that followed was a cataclysm beyond human comprehension. The very earth groaned under the strain of their battles. Mountains were torn up and thrown as weapons, and the seas boiled with divine fury. For 10 long years, the conflict raged across the landscape of myth, a stalemate of unimaginable power. The turning point came from the deepest, most primordial places of the earth. Upon the advice of Gaia, Zeus ventured into the abyssal pit of Tartarus and freed 3 beings of immense singular power, the one-eyed Cyclopes, master smiths who had been imprisoned by Cronus. In gratitude for their freedom, these colossal craftsmen forged for the Olympians the most powerful weapons the world had ever seen. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a concentrated force of pure cosmic energy that he could hurl with unerring aim. For Poseidon, they crafted a trident that could shake the earth and churn the oceans. For Hades, they fashioned a helm of darkness that rendered its wearer completely invisible. Armed with these divine instruments, the tide of the war turned decisively. The final, climactic battle was a spectacle of raw, elemental violence. Visualize the sky split by the blinding flash of Zeus's lightning, the ground heaving as Poseidon drove his trident into the earth, and Hades moving unseen among the Titan ranks, spreading confusion and fear. Zeus focused his celestial wrath upon the Titan leadership, striking down Menoetius with a thunderbolt and casting him into the eternal gloom of Tartarus. The mighty Atlas was given a unique and eternal punishment, condemned to stand at the western edge of the world, bearing the weight of the celestial heavens upon his shoulders for all time. With their leaders defeated, the remaining Titans were routed, rounded up, and cast headlong into the dark, bronze-walled dungeon of Tartarus, where they were placed under the watchful guard of the 100-handed giants, the Hecatoncheires. This victory was more than just a change of management on Mount Olympus. It was the establishment of a new cosmic order. The chaotic, primal rule of the Titans was replaced by a pantheon that, while still capable of great passion and pettiness, brought a semblance of structure and law to the universe. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the world amongst themselves. Zeus won the sky and became king of the gods. Poseidon claimed the seas, and Hades became the lord of the underworld. The stone that Cronus had vomited up was set at Delphi, the very center of the world, as a monument to the new age. This legend of Zeus's rise is the foundational myth of the Greek world, a story that explains how order was wrested from chaos, how the gods we recognize came to be, and how the stage was set for all the epic dramas of heroes and monsters that would follow. From the sun-drenched peaks of Olympus and the triumph of raw power, we journey now to the misty, ancient forests of the Norse cosmos, where wisdom is not seized through conquest but earned through profound and painful sacrifice. Here we encounter Odin, the All-Father, a god whose thirst for understanding drove him to endure torments that would break any lesser being. While Zeus secured his reign through force of arms, Odin secured his authority through an agonizing quest for knowledge, a journey that reveals a far darker, more introspective path to divinity. His first great sacrifice revolves around the Well of Mimir, a pool of crystal-clear water located at one of the roots of the great world tree, Yggdrasil. This was no ordinary spring. Its waters held all the knowledge and memory of the cosmos, and it was guarded by Mimir, a being of immense wisdom whose name itself means the Rememberer. Odin, recognizing that true power lay in foresight and understanding, approached the well and asked for a single drink. Mimir, knowing the value of what he guarded, demanded a price, a terrible personal price. He demanded one of Odin's own eyes. Without hesitation, the god of gods gouged out his eye and dropped it into the well's depths, where it is said to rest still, staring back from the water as a permanent reminder of the cost of wisdom. In return, Mimir granted him a draught, and with it, Odin gained a depth of insight that set him apart from all other beings. He could now perceive the hidden workings of the world, the threads of fate, and the secrets whispered on the wind. This act alone would define most deities, but for Odin, it was only the beginning. The loss of an eye was a price paid for external knowledge, but to grasp the very fabric of reality, he would have to turn his quest inward, embarking on a shamanistic ordeal of self-destruction and rebirth. This led to his second, even more harrowing sacrifice. Driven to master the magical alphabet of the runes symbols that held power over life, death, and destiny, Odin journeyed to the very heart of Yggdrasil. He took his own spear, Gungnir, a weapon sworn by unbreakable oaths, and used it to pierce his own side, hanging himself from a mighty branch of the world tree as a willing offering to himself. For 9 days and 9 nights he dangled there, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, without food or water, exposed to the elements and the agony of his wound. He was a spectacle of divine suffering, a god suspended in a state of ritual death. As the days bled into nights, his consciousness faded, his life force ebbing away, bringing him to the very brink of annihilation. It was in this liminal space, at the peak of his torment on the 9th night, that the miracle occurred. Peering downward through his pain, he finally saw the runes glowing with primal energy in the roots of the tree below. With a final, desperate effort of will, he reached down and seized them, crying out as he grasped their secrets before tumbling, exhausted and reborn, from the tree. This incredible act is steeped in shamanistic tradition, mirroring the initiatory journeys of medicine men and seers across ancient cultures who would undergo symbolic deaths to gain spiritual power. Odin's auto-sacrifice was the ultimate initiation. He did not simply learn the runes, he internalized their essence through his suffering, understanding their power because he had experienced the very realities they represented: pain, sacrifice, and the thin veil between life and death. He emerged from this ordeal not just as a wise king, but as a master of magic and fate, having paid for his power with his own blood and torment. This is what defines Odin as the All-Father. His authority is not inherited or won through simple battle. It is earned through a terrible personal price. He is a god who is missing an eye, a god who bears the scars of his own spear, a god who knows the taste of his own mortality. This makes him a profoundly complex and relatable figure, a ruler who leads not from a place of untouchable privilege, but from the hard-won wisdom of immense suffering, a deity who understood that to see the whole truth, one must first be willing to sacrifice a part of oneself. Yet the quest for knowledge, even of the most profound and painful kind, is a deeply personal transformation. In the sun-scorched realm of ancient Egypt, we find a story that moves beyond the individual to explain the very cycles of life, death, and the hope of renewal for an entire civilization. This is the legend of Osiris, a tale not of personal sacrifice for power, but of royal murder, relentless love, and a resurrection that would define a culture's understanding of eternity. Here, the central drama unfolds not on a mountaintop or a world tree, but within a royal family, pitting brother against brother in a conflict born of bitter jealousy. Osiris was the wise and benevolent king of Egypt, a god who taught humanity the arts of agriculture, law, and worship, ushering in a golden age of peace and prosperity. His brother, Set, was a god of chaos, storms, and the harsh desert, a force of raw, untamed power who grew to resent his brother's widespread adoration and orderly reign. This simmering envy would boil over into one of the most infamous acts of betrayal in all of mythology. Set's plot was as cunning as it was cruel. He hosted a great feast in his brother's honor, presenting a stunningly ornate chest crafted precisely to Osiris's measurements. With theatrical flair, Set declared that he would gift this magnificent sarcophagus to whichever guest could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the gods tried and failed, but when the unsuspecting Osiris lay down inside the beautifully decorated box, it fit him as if made for him. In that very instant, Set's accomplices rushed forward, slamming the lid shut. They sealed it with molten lead, transforming the luxurious object into an airtight coffin, and hurled it into the mighty Nile River. The king of the living was now a prisoner, trapped and drowned, his body carried away by the currents. News of this horrific murder shattered the kingdom, but no one was more devastated than Osiris's devoted sister and wife, the goddess Isis. Her grief was immense, but it was swiftly channeled into an unwavering resolve. She would not let her husband's story end in the depths of the river. Cutting her hair and donning the robes of a mourner, she embarked on a desperate, epic search across the entire land, following every whisper and clue to find the chest that contained her beloved. Her journey led her to the distant coast of Phoenicia, where she discovered the chest had become lodged in a tamarisk tree, which had grown so magnificently around it that the entire trunk had been cut down to serve as a pillar in the king's palace. Through her divine cunning and magic, Isis secured the pillar and extracted the coffin, bringing the body of her murdered husband back to Egypt for a proper burial. But Set, ever vigilant and vicious, discovered her plan. In a final, despicable act of desecration, he stole the body of Osiris and with his followers hacked it into 14, or in some versions 42 pieces, scattering them far and wide across the Nile Delta. He believed that by dismembering the king, he had erased him forever, making reassembly and resurrection impossible. This could have been the end, a victory for chaos and death. But Isis's devotion was a force stronger than Set's malice. She refused to surrender. With the help of her sister Nephthys and the jackal-headed god of embalming, Anubis, she began a second, even more painstaking search. She traveled to every nome, every district of Egypt, recovering each piece of her husband. Wherever she found a fragment, she erected a shrine, forever linking the geography of Egypt to the body of its fallen god. Using her profound magical abilities and the nascent art of mummification that Anubis provided, she reassembled the body, wrapping the pieces in linen bandages and chanting spells of such power that she was able to temporarily reanimate Osiris. This was not a permanent return to the land of the living, but a fleeting, divine moment. In this state of magical resurrection, Isis conceived a child with her husband, the falcon god Horus. This miraculous conception ensured that the legacy of Osiris would live on, that a rightful heir existed to challenge the usurper Set. Having fulfilled this cosmic purpose, Osiris transformed. He did not die again, but descended to rule a new kingdom, the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. There, he became the Lord of the Dead, the eternal judge who presided over the weighing of the heart ceremony, offering the promise of an afterlife to every righteous soul. This incredible saga became the absolute bedrock of Egyptian civilization for thousands of years. The annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited rich, life-giving silt across the farmlands, was seen as the tears of Isis or the revitalizing fluids of Osiris himself, a yearly repetition of his death and the land's rebirth. The Djed pillar, a powerful symbol resembling a tree with crossbars, was understood as the backbone of Osiris, representing stability, endurance, and resurrection, ceremonially raised in festivals to celebrate the continuity of life. Most importantly, every single pharaoh in life was identified with Horus, the avenging sun, and in death became one with Osiris, the resurrected king. This myth provided a divine blueprint for order triumphing over chaos, for the belief that death was not an end, but a transition to an eternal existence, ensuring that the legacy of a just ruler like the Nile itself would always return. While the stories of Osiris and Odin reveal the profound personal costs of wisdom and resurrection, our next legend expands this cosmic drama to an almost unimaginable scale. presenting a universe created not by a single act of sacrifice or betrayal, but through a collective, epoch-spanning endeavor. We travel now from the banks of the Nile to the vast mythical cosmology of Hinduism to witness a celestial event of such grandeur that it dwarfs most other creation myths, the churning of the ocean of milk known as the Samudra Manthan. This is not a tale of one god's struggle, but a sprawling epic of cooperation and conflict between the forces of light and darkness, all orchestrated to obtain the ultimate prize, immortality itself. The stage for this cosmic drama was set during a period of great crisis. The Devas, the gods of order and light, had been weakened and were losing their eternal war against the Asuras, the powerful demons of chaos and darkness. Recognizing their dwindling strength, the Devas sought the counsel of the great preserver god Vishnu. His solution was as ingenious as it was audacious. He proposed a temporary, unprecedented alliance. The Devas and Asuras would have to work together to churn the primordial ocean of milk, a boundless sea of potentiality, in order to bring forth the Amrita, the nectar of eternal life. It was a dangerous gamble, pitting ancient enemies as partners in a quest that, if successful, would grant ultimate power to both sides. The logistics of this endeavor were as monumental as its purpose. They needed a churning rod and a churning rope of cosmic proportions. For the rod, they uprooted the mighty mountain Mandara. To prevent it from sinking into the soft ocean floor, Vishnu himself took the form of a giant turtle, Kurma, and dove beneath the waves to support the massive mountain on his indestructible shell. For the rope, they enlisted the king of the serpent beings, Vasuki, who willingly allowed himself to be coiled around the mountain. With the stage set, the two factions took their places. The Devas, perhaps wiser or more cautious, positioned themselves at the tail end of the great serpent Vasuki. The Asuras, eager for power and glory, seized the head. And so the churning began. This was not a quick process. It was an agonizingly slow, monumental effort that shook the very foundations of the cosmos. As they pulled back and forth on the serpent, the mountain Mandara rotated, grinding against the turtle's shell and churning the ocean with a deep, resonant roar. The strain was immense. Vasuki, suffering from the relentless pulling, began to exhale vast clouds of poisonous smoke and fire, which wreathed the Asuras at his head, causing them great distress, a subtle foreshadowing of the trials to come. But from this immense effort, the ocean began to yield its treasures, releasing them one by one in a spectacular procession of divine manifestations. First came a deadly poison known as halahala. This was no ordinary toxin. It was a concentrated essence of universal malevolence, so potent that it billowed forth in dark, suffocating clouds, threatening to annihilate all of creation. The world began to wither, and both gods and demons, paralyzed with fear, cried out for help. It was then that the great ascetic god Shiva, the transformer, intervened. In an act of supreme compassion and detachment, he gathered the entire ocean of poison into his hands and drank it. The poison was so powerful that it stained his throat blue, earning him the name Nilakantha, the blue-throated one. By containing the poison within his own divine body, Shiva neutralized its destructive power, saving the universe from imminent destruction and allowing the churning to continue. With the great danger averted, the ocean continued to yield its wonders. A succession of miraculous beings and objects emerged. The celestial physician Dhanvantari appeared, holding the white pot containing the coveted Amrita. The divine wish-fulfilling cow, Kamadhenu, arose, followed by the beautiful goddess of wine, Varuni. The celestial nymphs, the Apsaras, danced into existence, and the moon itself, Chandra, was plucked from the waters and placed upon Shiva's forehead. A magnificent white elephant, Airavata, emerged, who would become the Vahana or mount of the king of the gods, Indra. And then from the depths arose the goddess Lakshmi, the deity of prosperity, fortune, and beauty. Seated on a fully bloomed lotus, she radiated a grace and splendor that captivated everyone. Her gaze fell upon Vishnu, and recognizing his supreme nature, she chose him as her eternal consort. Her emergence symbolized that true and lasting prosperity is born from arduous endeavor and is always aligned with the principle of cosmic order and preservation. This moment of divine union was a brief, beautiful calm before the final, inevitable storm. For now, the ultimate prize, the pot of Amrita, was finally within reach, and the fragile alliance between the Devas and Asuras shattered instantly. The Asuras, driven by greed, seized the pot. Chaos erupted as a frantic battle for the nectar began. It was then that Vishnu enacted the final part of his cosmic plan. Taking the form of the enchantingly beautiful Mohini, a female form of irresistible allure, he distracted the Asuras. While they were mesmerized by her dance, Mohini took the pot of Amrita and proceeded to serve it only to the Devas, ensuring that the forces of order would regain their strength and immortality. One Asura named Rahu disguised himself as a diva and managed to take a sip, but before the nectar could pass his throat, the sun and moon gods alerted Vishnu, who instantly severed the demon's head with his celestial discus. Rahu's head, now immortal, forever chases the sun and moon across the sky, causing eclipses in an eternal act of vengeance. The symbolism of the Samudra Manthan is as profound as its narrative is epic. It is a grand allegory for the human spiritual journey. The churning of the ocean represents the intense effort of spiritual practice, of meditation and self-discipline, through which an individual churns their own consciousness. The emerging treasures and poisons symbolize the various psychic phenomena, both blissful and terrifying, that can arise on the path to enlightenment. The initial poison of Halahala signifies the ego and the negative tendencies that must first be confronted and transformed. Just as Shiva consumed and neutralized the poison, a spiritual seeker must learn to transmute their own inner darkness. The subsequent emergence of Lakshmi teaches that spiritual wealth and inner abundance are the natural results of such dedicated effort. And the final goal, the Amrita, represents the ultimate state of self-realization and liberation, the immortal nectar of enlightenment that is attained only after persevering through the great struggle between our higher aspirations and our base desires. This legend beautifully encapsulates the Hindu worldview, where the cosmos itself is engaged in a continuous process of creation and refinement, and where even the darkest forces have a necessary role to play in the grand, unfolding dance of the universe. From the cosmic struggle at the ocean of milk, we journey now to a legend where the fate of the gods hangs not on a universe-spanning effort, but on a single, stolen weapon and a plan so audacious it borders on the absurd. This is the Norse tale of the theft of Thor's hammer, a story that masterfully blends edge of your seat tension with outright comedy, revealing that even the mightiest of gods sometimes has to rely on wit over pure strength. One morning, the god of thunder woke to find his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, gone. This was not merely a misplaced tool, it was the primary weapon that safeguarded both Asgard and Midgard from the constant threat of the giants. Without it, the realms were left vulnerable, defenseless. Panic spread through the golden halls of the gods. It was the ever-perceptive Loki who, borrowing the feather cloak of the goddess Freyja, flew to the world of the giants to investigate. There he found the giant Thrym, smug and triumphant, who proudly confessed to the theft. But Thrym's demand was not for gold or land, it was for a bride. He would only return Mjolnir if the beautiful goddess Freyja was given to him as his wife. When Loki returned with this news, the reaction in Asgard was one of pure outrage. Freyja, a goddess of independent spirit and formidable power, was so enraged that the very halls of her palace shook, and the famed necklace of the Brisingamen shattered from the force of her fury. She flatly refused. A council of the gods was convened, and the mood was grim. How could they recover their ultimate defense without sacrificing one of their own? It was the god Heimdall, the watchman who sees all, who proposed a solution so ridiculous that it just might work. He suggested that Thor himself should go to Jotunheim disguised as the bride Freyja. The idea was met with initial resistance. Thor was the epitome of masculine power with a roaring voice, a fierce red beard, and an appetite to match his strength. The thought of him pretending to be a blushing bride was laughable, but Loki, ever the master of mischief and persuasion, saw the potential. He convinced Thor that this was the only way, promising to accompany him as his clever handmaid to guide the charade. And so, the most unlikely duo set off. Thor was dressed in Freyja's finest gown, with the newly repaired Brisingamen necklace draped around his neck and a veil hiding his famous features. Loki, in the simpler garb of a serving maid, was there to do all the talking. Their arrival in Jotunheim caused a stir. Thrym was overjoyed, preparing a lavish wedding feast in his hall. The comedy of errors began almost immediately. At the banquet table, the giants were taken aback by the bride's staggering appetite. Thor, unable to contain his nature, single-handedly consumed an entire ox, 8 whole salmon, and washed it all down with 3 casks of mead meant for all the wedding guests. Thrym, bewildered, remarked that he had never seen a woman with such a hunger. It was Loki, in his role as the quick-thinking handmaid, who saved the moment. Leaning in, he whispered to the giant king that Freyja had been so excited for the wedding, so consumed with love for Thrym, that she had not eaten for 8 full days. The giant, flattered and foolish, accepted this explanation, but the near disasters were not over. Thrym, his curiosity piqued, lifted the bride's veil to steal a kiss and was met with a terrifying sight: 2 eyes burning with a fierce, divine fire staring back at him. He recoiled, exclaiming that Freyja's gaze was frighteningly intense, like smoldering embers. Once again, Loki's silver tongue smoothed things over. He explained that the goddess had not slept a wink for 8 nights, her passion for Thrym keeping her awake and setting her eyes ablaze. The giant, completely duped by this flattery, was now utterly convinced. With the giant king thoroughly charmed, he commanded that the wedding gift be brought forth to sanctify the union. And so, the hammer Mjolnir was carried into the hall and laid upon the bride's lap. This was the moment Thor had been waiting for. The instant he felt the familiar, invigorating weight of his weapon in his hands, the disguise fell away. He tore off the veil, his eyes flashing with triumphant fury, and his grip tightened around Mjolnir's handle. The hall, once filled with celebration, fell into a stunned silence broken only by Thor's roar. What followed was not a battle but a slaughter. He swung Mjolnir with all his pent-up rage, striking Thrym first and then turning on the entire assembly of wedding guests. He and Loki fought their way out of the giants' hall, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The giants who had moments before been laughing and feasting now lying defeated. This story is a brilliant piece of Norse storytelling because it shows a different side of these powerful figures. Thor, for all his world-shaking strength, was rendered helpless without his hammer, forced into a role that went against his very nature. It highlights that brute force is not always the answer. Sometimes cunning and deception are necessary. Loki, often portrayed as a mere trickster or a villain in waiting, is here the essential hero, his clever words saving the mission again and again. It's a reminder that in the Norse worldview, survival often required a blend of might and mind, and that even the most serious of situations could have a deeply humorous human core. We now step away from the grand escapades of gods against giants and monsters and turn to a question that lies at the very heart of our journey. Where did we, humanity, come from in these epic stories? The answers, found in 2 of the ancient world's most influential cultures, reveal a stunning divergence in how our ancestors perceived their own place in the cosmos. On one hand, we have the noble, rebellious act of a titan in Greek myth. On the other, a stark and utilitarian creation from Mesopotamia that frames our existence in a far more transactional light. This is the tale of 2 creations and the profound legacy they left on human self-perception. First, let's travel to the newly ordered world of the Greek gods, a world still young and lacking a being to honor its divine rulers. This is where the Titan Prometheus, whose name means forethought, enters the stage. Unlike the other Titans who fought against Zeus, Prometheus had sided with the Olympians, gifted with a clever and prophetic mind. Seeing the potential in the raw earth, he descended to a riverbank, took clay from the soil, and mixed it with water. With his own hands, he meticulously sculpted the first humans, shaping them in the likeness of the gods themselves. This was a radical act. We were not formed from dirt alone, but from earth and divine inspiration, crafted to stand upright and gaze at the heavens in a way no other creature could. Yet, these first humans were primitive, living in darkness and cold, huddled in caves without purpose or community. They possessed minds but no means to cultivate them. Filled with compassion for his creations, Prometheus decided to empower them. His next act would be the ultimate defiance. He journeyed to Olympus and, using a fennel stalk to conceal a burning ember from the hearth of the gods, he stole fire and delivered it to humanity. This was not merely the gift of warmth and light. Fire was the spark of civilization itself. With it, humans learned to cook food, forge metal tools, and create art. They developed agriculture, built cities, and began to study the stars. Fire represented reason, technology, and the power to shape their own destiny, lifting them from a state of nature to one of culture. For Zeus, this was an unforgivable transgression. The king of the gods saw this elevation of humanity as a direct threat to the divine order. How could gods reign supreme if mortals possessed the very tools of progress? His vengeance against Prometheus was swift and horrifyingly cruel. The Titan was seized and dragged to a desolate mountain in the Caucasus. There he was chained immovably to a rock where a giant eagle, an emblem of Zeus himself, would descend upon him each day to devour his liver. As an immortal, Prometheus's liver would regenerate each night, only for the torment to begin again at dawn, an eternal cycle of agony designed to break a will that would not bend. This punishment was not just for the theft, but for the act of creation itself, for daring to give humanity a spark of the divine potential and the means to challenge their intended station. The Greek myth, therefore, frames humanity as a beloved, if flawed, creation of a compassionate benefactor. Our existence is a product of artistic design, and our advancement a result of a sacred, stolen gift paid for with unimaginable suffering. We are, in this view, inherently valuable and destined for more than mere servitude. Now, let's shift our gaze eastward to the sun-baked river valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, to the world of Mesopotamian myth as told in the epic of Atrahasis. Here, the origin of humanity is not born from compassion, but from divine exhaustion and complaint. In the beginning, the younger gods, the Igigi, were forced into back-breaking labor by the senior deities. For centuries, they dug irrigation canals, tilled the fields of the gods, and maintained the world, their toil unending. Finally, they reached a breaking point. They laid down their tools, surrounded the great temple of the chief god Enlil, and burned their baskets in a massive strike that shook the heavens. The divine council was thrown into chaos. The god of wisdom, E, also known as Enki, proposed a solution. He suggested they create a new being to take over the exhausting work. The plan was set in motion. They chose a god named Jeshtu-E, or sometimes Wi-Illa, a deity who was considered rebellious or expendable. In a solemn and brutal ceremony, the divine assembly slaughtered him. The mother goddess, Mami, then mixed clay from the earth with the slain god's flesh and his blood, which now served as the animating spirit. The gods spat upon the mixture, and Mami pinched off 14 pieces of clay, shaping 7 male and 7 female figures. This is a creation of profound ambiguity. Humanity was formed from the earth, yes, but we were also made from the very substance of a murdered god. This duality is everything. Our physical bodies are clay, mortal, and lowly, but our inner essence, our life force, is divine, a fragment of a celestial being. We were created with a singular, explicit purpose: to serve the gods, to bear the yoke of labor so the deities could live in leisure. The relationship was strictly transactional. Humans would work the land, grow food, and offer sacrifices. The smoke of their burnt offerings was literally food for the gods. In return, the gods would maintain the cosmic order, but this myth also contains the seeds of humanity's fragility. The noise and clamor of the growing human population eventually became a nuisance to the irritable Enlil, who responded not with chains for a titan, but with plagues, famines, and ultimately, a great flood to wipe us out, a calamity from which only the wise Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise one, would be warned to escape. So in this Mesopotamian view, humanity is a divine afterthought, a clever tool made from sacred and profane materials. Our purpose is to serve, and our existence is perpetually precarious, subject to the whims of powerful, often indifferent masters. When we place these two legends side by side, the contrasts are as illuminating as the parallels. Both cultures saw our origins rooted in clay, connecting us intimately to the earth from which we sprang. Yet the Greek story is one of empowerment and stolen potential, while the Mesopotamian is one of function and inherent servitude. One myth gives us a heroic champion in Prometheus, a figure who suffers for our enlightenment. The other offers no such benefactor. The gods created us for their own convenience. These foundational stories shaped entire worldviews. The Greek narrative, with its emphasis on human potential and the noble struggle for knowledge, would echo through the ages, influencing philosophy, art, and the very concept of humanism. The Mesopotamian view, with its themes of service, divine caprice, and the fragility of life, reflected the harsh realities of survival in an unpredictable environment, where humanity's place was to appease the powerful forces that controlled the floodwaters and the harvest. These are not just quaint tales from a forgotten past. They are the deepest answers our ancestors could provide to the eternal questions. Why are we here? Are we the cherished children of a compassionate creator, or are we merely employees of distant, demanding gods? The echoes of these ancient myths still resonate in our cultures, our philosophies, and in the quiet ways we still search for our own purpose beneath the vast and watching sky. After exploring the origins of humanity, we face a startlingly common theme across the globe: the near-total destruction of that same creation. Following the path of divine disenchantment from Mesopotamia, we arrive at one of humanity's oldest recorded stories of cataclysm, a narrative so powerful it echoes through millennia. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's quest for immortality leads him to a distant, remote land where he meets the immortal flood survivor, Utnapishtim. This wise old man recounts a chilling tale. The great gods, led by Enlil, had grown weary of the incessant noise and clamor of the human race. Their cities had become too loud, their populations too vast, and the council of deities unanimously decided to send a great flood to wipe them all out, a final solution to the nuisance of humanity. But one god, the Lord of Wisdom and Fresh Waters, felt this collective punishment was unjust. Bound by his oath not to directly defy the other gods, devised a clever ruse. He went to the hut of the righteous Utnapishtim, who lived by the river, and spoke not to the man directly, but to the walls of his reed hut. He instructed the walls to tell Utnapishtim to dismantle his home and use the materials to build a massive cubical boat, sealing it thoroughly with bitumen. He was to bring his family, skilled craftsmen, and the seed of all living creatures aboard. The people of his city, Shuruppak, were told that Enlil had rejected Utnapishtim and that he was building the vessel to escape Enlil's personal wrath, a story they believed. For 7 days the ark was built, and then the storm arrived. It was a tempest of such ferocity that even the gods themselves grew terrified, retreating to the highest heaven and cowering like dogs. For 6 days and 6 nights, the winds raged and the floodwaters obliterated the earth, turning the world into a single, raging ocean. On the 7th day, the storm subsided. Utnapishtim's boat came to rest on Mount Nimush, and after waiting another week, he released a dove which found no resting place and returned. then a swallow was sent out and it too returned. Finally, he released a raven which found receding waters and did not come back. Utnapishtim then emerged and offered a grand sacrifice to the gods, who, now starving for the offerings humans had once provided, swarmed around the sweet smell of the smoke like flies. Enlil, at first enraged to find survivors, was chastened by E, who argued for a more proportionate justice. In the end, Utnapishtim and his wife were granted the gift of immortality, not as a reward for heroism, but as a permanent reminder of the flood that should never be repeated. Far to the east, within the vast cosmological cycles of Hindu tradition, a similar deluge was destined to occur, but its purpose and execution were profoundly different. This is the story of Matsya, the first avatar of the great preserver god Vishnu. In this version, the flood is not an act of divine irritation, but a necessary cleansing at the end of a cosmic cycle, a reset to prepare the world for a new age of creation. The sage Manu, a figure of immense piety, was performing his daily rituals by a river when he gently rescued a small fish. The fish, however, was not what it seemed. It spoke to him, pleading for protection from larger predators. Manu, filled with compassion, placed it in a jar, but the fish grew at an astonishing rate, outgrowing the jar, then a pot, then a well, and finally a great lake. Realizing this was no ordinary creature, Manu carried the now giant fish to the ocean, where it revealed its true form as Lord Vishnu. The god warned Manu that a catastrophic flood would soon dissolve the entire world into a primordial sea. He instructed Manu to build a massive, sturdy ship and to gather the seeds of all plants, the essence of all creatures, and the 7 great sages to accompany him. When the ominous clouds gathered and the waters began to rise, the gigantic fish returned, its single horn gleaming. Manu tied his ship to the horn with Vasuki, the great serpent king, who served as a divine rope, and Vishnu as Matsya then towed the vessel across the raging, limitless waters. He guided them safely through the tempest, protecting them not just from the flood, but from a demon who attempted to steal the sacred Vedas, the scriptures containing all cosmic knowledge which Matsya also recovered. When the waters finally receded, the ship came to rest on the only peak visible, the summit of a mountain, and from this point, Manu and his companions would repopulate the earth, preserving both biological life and spiritual wisdom for the next great cycle of time. When we place these two ancient flood narratives side by side, their shared structure is undeniable, yet their underlying philosophies create a stark and revealing contrast. In both, a deity of wisdom intervenes to warn a single righteous man, who builds a ship to survive a world-engulfing deluge, ensuring the preservation of life and becoming the progenitor of a renewed humanity. But the motivation for the flood itself could not be more different. The Mesopotamian version is a story of divine wrath, impatience, and even regret. The gods act like a dysfunctional council, making a drastic decision they later come to regret when they realize they have eliminated their own source of sustenance. Humanity's value is chillingly utilitarian. The Hindu version, by contrast, is cosmic and cyclical. The flood is not a punishment for sin, but a necessary natural dissolution, much like the tide washing a beach clean. Vishnu's intervention is not a subversion of a rash decision, but an intrinsic part of his role as the preserver of cosmic order, ensuring that life and knowledge are carried safely from one age to the next. The chosen survivor, Utnapishtim, is rewarded with personal immortality, a solitary exception. Manu, however, becomes the father of a new humanity, his task being one of cosmic responsibility rather than personal salvation. These striking parallels have led scholars and scientists to wonder if they hold a kernel of historical truth. Could these stories be distant, amplified memories of a real, catastrophic flooding event at the dawn of civilization? Archaeological excavations in ancient Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Kish have revealed distinct layers of water-lane clay, sitting directly atop older settlements, evidence of a massive, region-wide inundation around 5,000 years ago. Such an event in the flat, fertile river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates would have been apocalyptic for the early agrarian communities living there, and trauma so profound it would have been seared into cultural memory for centuries. This collective experience could easily have been woven into the mythic fabric of the region, a story that then traveled along trade routes, potentially influencing other cultures. Yet the sheer prevalence of flood myths, from the Greek story of Deucalion and Pirha to the indigenous tales of the Americas and the Pacific Islands, suggests a deeper, almost universal human experience. Great floods are a common geological reality in our planet's history, from rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age to catastrophic tsunamis. These narratives seem to tap into a fundamental human anxiety about our vulnerability to nature's immense power and our profound need to find meaning, and sometimes a warning within the chaos. They are more than just disaster reports. They are profound explorations of the relationship between humanity and the divine, asking us whether we believe the universe is governed by capricious masters we must appease, or by a conscious, preserving intelligence that guides us through the inevitable cycles of destruction and rebirth. But the dynamics of power in the Greek pantheon rarely involved a gentle transfer of knowledge. More often, they were forged in acts of profound violence and startling transformation, as seen in one of the most bizarre and symbolic birth stories ever told. After securing his throne, Zeus faced the same gnawing fear that had driven his own father to horrifying acts. A prophecy echoing the one given to Cronus foretold that the next child born from the Titaness Metis, the goddess of cunning wisdom and deep thought, would be a son destined to overthrow him. This was a terrifying prospect, for Metis was not just any consort. She was the very embodiment of practical wisdom and clever counsel, the one who had provided Zeus with the emetic potion used to free his siblings. To prevent this fate, Zeus resorted to his father's monstrous method, but with a chilling twist of his own. Instead of waiting for the child to be born, he deceived Metis with gentle words, and when she was pregnant, opened his mouth and swallowed her whole, absorbing her into his own being. He believed that by containing both the mother and the unborn child within himself, he had neutralized the threat entirely, making himself the sole vessel of power and wisdom. Time passed, but the story was far from over. The pregnancy of Metis continued within Zeus, a divine gestation occurring not in a womb but in the mind of the king of the gods. Eventually, he was overcome by a pounding, unbearable headache, a pain so intense that it felt as though his skull was splitting apart. The mighty ruler of Olympus, who could hurl thunderbolts with a thought, was brought low by an agony erupting from within his own head. He roared in torment, and the other gods, alarmed and uncertain, summoned the smith god Hephaestus. Understanding what needed to be done, Hephaestus took up his heavy, double-bladed axe, and with a single, precise strike, he cleaved open the skull of his father. From the gaping fissure in Zeus's head did not emerge a helpless infant, but a fully grown adult goddess, radiant and formidable. This was Athena, and she sprang forth with a mighty war cry that echoed across the heavens, already clad in gleaming, golden battle armor, a sharp spear in one hand and a shield emblazoned with the terrifying head of the Gorgon in the other. Her eyes blazed with an intense, gray-eyed intelligence, and her very presence declared her domains: strategic warfare, civic order, and the highest forms of rational thought. This incredible narrative is packed with layers of profound meaning that resonate far beyond a simple origin story. The name of her mother, Metis, is the crucial key. In the ancient Greek world, Metis represented a specific kind of wisdom, not the abstract philosophy of later ages, but a practical, cunning, and adaptable intelligence. It was the shrewdness of the sailor navigating a storm, the cleverness of the craftsman, and the strategic mind of the general. By swallowing Metis, Zeus wasn't just preventing a rival, he was actively incorporating this essential form of wisdom into his own nature, making it a fundamental part of his divine authority. He became a ruler who possessed not just raw power, but the cunning to wield it effectively. This act fundamentally redefined the source of wisdom in the Greek worldview, transforming it from an external force to an internal, almost patriarchal possession. Athena's birth directly from Zeus's head solidifies this idea. She is literally the embodiment of her father's intellect, a goddess born solely from the male principle, with no mother present at her emergence. This neatly sidestepped the ancient fear of being overthrown by a son, while also establishing a female deity entirely under the control and patronage of the supreme patriarch. She becomes his favored child, the living expression of his strategic mind, and she remains notably virginal, eternally loyal to her father, and free from the complicating alliances of marriage or motherhood. This unique origin perfectly explains Athena's dual nature as a goddess of both warfare and wisdom. Unlike Ares, the god of raw, chaotic, and bloodthirsty battle lust, Athena represents the general's brilliant strategy, the disciplined courage of the hoplite phalanx, and the use of intellect to achieve victory with minimal casualties. Her wisdom is not passive contemplation, it is applied, practical intelligence used to solve problems, build cities, and govern justly. She is the patron of heroes like Odysseus, whose success relied on cleverness over brute strength, and she is the guardian of the city of Athens, where she gifted the people with the olive tree, a symbol of peace and economic prosperity. Her emergence fully armed speaks to the idea that true wisdom and civic order must be defended, that civilization itself is an achievement born from intelligent planning and the capacity for organized, justified conflict. The visual of her birth is one of the most powerful in all of mythology, a stark, shocking moment of violence that gives way not to gore, but to a figure of majestic order and brilliant light, a testament to the Greek belief that great wisdom and civilization can often be born from the most painful and disruptive of beginnings. While the gods of Asgard celebrated their cunning victory in retrieving Mjolnir, a far more insidious threat was growing in the shadows of their own realm, a threat born not from the world of the giants, but from the very heart of their own family. This is the chilling legend of the Binding of Fenrir, a story that strips away any pretense of divine invincibility and reveals a pantheon governed by a desperate, fearful understanding of a fate they cannot escape. The wolf Fenrir was no ordinary beast. He was one of the three monstrous children of the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angerboda, a sibling to the world serpent Jormungandr and the half-living, half-dead goddess Hel. From his earliest days, Fenrir grew at an alarming, unnatural rate. The gods watched in mounting dread as the playful pup swiftly became a creature of immense size and power, his eyes gleaming with a primal intelligence that promised only ruin. Their fear was not born of simple prejudice, but of a terrifying prophecy spoken by the Norns, the weavers of destiny. They foretold that during the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok, Fenrir would break free and devour Odin himself, the All-Father, becoming a central agent in the downfall of the gods and the end of the world as they knew it. This grim knowledge hung over Asgard like a shroud, turning their golden halls into a gilded cage where every day was a countdown to annihilation. The gods decided that they could not kill Fenrir outright, for such a blatant act of violence against one of their own, even a monstrous one, would break the sacred laws of their society and bring about its own form of chaos. Instead, they resolved to neutralize the threat through binding, to render the wolf impotent through restraint. Their first attempt was a test of sheer strength. They presented Fenrir with a massive, heavy chain called leading, and feigning a game to test his legendary power, challenged him to break it. The great wolf, perhaps amused by their transparent ploy, allowed them to fetter him. Then, with a single, effortless flex of his muscles, he shattered the iron links as if they were made of glass. the gods masked their terror with applause, praising his strength while internally their dread deepened. Undeterred, they commissioned the dwarves, the master smiths of Svartalfheim, to forge an even stronger chain. This second fetter, named Dromi, was twice as thick and heavy, crafted with every ounce of dwarven skill. Once again, they presented it to Fenrir as a challenge, and once again, the wolf, now more suspicious but still confident in his own might, allowed them to bind him. He strained for a moment, the chains groaning under the pressure, and then with a deafening crack he burst free, scattering the broken links across the ground. The failure of Dromi sent a wave of pure panic through the divine council. If the strongest physical chains in the 9 realms could not hold him, what possibly could? It was then that Odin turned again to the dwarves, not for strength of metal, but for a different kind of power altogether, the power of magic and impossibility. The dwarves of Svartalfheim, working in their deep, hidden forges, created something that defied the very laws of nature. It was a ribbon named Gleipnir. To the eye, it was a delicate, silken cord, soft and light as a gossamer thread. But its composition was a catalogue of cosmic paradoxes. It was woven from the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These were not literal, physical ingredients, but conceptual impossibilities given form. The sound of a cat's footfall is silence itself. The beard of a woman is a non-existent thing. The roots of a mountain are an abstract concept. Gleipnir was therefore not a physical object in the normal sense, but a binding made of pure enchantment, a knot of impossibility that no amount of physical strength could ever break, for it had no substance to break against. Armed with this deceptively fragile-looking cord, the gods journeyed to the isolated lake Amsvartnir on the island of Lyngvi. The atmosphere was thick with tension and unspoken fear. They called Fenrir to them, presenting Gleipnir not as a test of strength, but as a final, ultimate challenge to his reputation. But the wolf was no longer the gullible creature of before. He had grown wise to their deceit. He looked at the flimsy ribbon and sensed the magic coiled within it. He told the gods that there was no glory in breaking such a slight thing, and that if it was made with guile and trickery, he would not allow them to bind him with it. The gods were at an impasse, their entire plan hinged on his submission. It was then that the god Tyr, the one-handed god of law and heroic glory, stepped forward. Of all the Aesir, Tyr had developed a unique bond with Fenrir, often feeding and tending to the wolf himself, a relationship built on a foundation of mutual, if wary, respect. Seeing that only a pledge of absolute good faith would convince the wolf, Tyr did the unthinkable. He placed his right hand, the hand upon which oaths were sworn, the symbol of his honor and his very identity as a god of justice, directly into Fenrir's mouth as a guarantee that the binding was fair and that the gods would release him. This was a sacrifice of staggering magnitude, a wager of his own divine essence against the survival of the cosmos. Trusting Tyr, the only god who had ever shown him honesty, Fenrir finally submitted. As the gods wound the silken Gleipnir around his legs, the wolf quickly realized his mistake. The more he struggled, the tighter the magical ribbon constricted. He roared in fury and betrayal, thrashing with all his immeasurable strength, but Gleipnir held fast, its enchantments making it stronger with every movement. In that moment of ultimate betrayal, Fenrir's jaws snapped shut, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. The god did not cry out, but stood in stoic silence, accepting the price of the salvation he had just purchased for Asgard. The gods, now triumphant in their grim task, dragged the bound Fenrir to a desolate, rocky place and secured Gleipnir to a massive boulder, which they anchored deep in the earth with a rock named Gjol. For a final, cruel measure, they took a sword and wedged it horizontally into Fenrir's mouth, forcing his jaws wide open. His terrible howls of rage and pain now silenced, the drool that flowed from his jaws forming a river of despair called Van. There he would lie, bound and gagged, until the day the chains of destiny would break and he would enact his prophesied role in Ragnarok. This legend is the ultimate expression of the Norse confrontation with an inescapable fate. The gods are not all powerful. They are trapped by a prophecy they are simultaneously trying to prevent and through their very actions ensuring will come to pass. Their victory is hollow, purchased with the permanent maiming of their most honorable member and the creation of an enemy whose hatred now burns with the heat of 1,000 suns. The binding of Fenrir is not a story of good triumphing over evil, but of necessity trumping morality, a stark reminder that in the Norse worldview, even the gods must sometimes sacrifice their own honor and commit terrible acts to stave off, for just a little while longer, the twilight that awaits them all. From the binding struggles of Asgard and the birth pangs of Olympus, we turn now to a drama that unfolded not just once, but every single night, a celestial battle upon which the fate of all creation hung in the balance. This is the Egyptian legend of Ra's solar bark, a story that transformed the simple setting of the sun into a perilous, heroic odyssey through the land of the dead. For the ancient Egyptians, the sun's daily journey was not a passive astronomical event. It was the ultimate expression of a cosmic war, a continuous cycle where the god Ra fought to ensure that dawn would always break again. As the sun dipped below the western horizon, it did not vanish. Instead, the great sun god Ra, often depicted as a man with the head of a falcon crowned by a solar disk, embarked upon his magnificent vessel, known as the Manjet bark or the bark of millions of years. This was not a simple boat, but a floating temple, a palace of light that would carry him through the 12 perilous regions of the underworld, corresponding to the 12 hours of the night. His journey was a descent into the Duat, a realm that was neither a paradise of reward nor a hell of punishment in the traditional sense, but a landscape of transformation and primal danger, populated by gods, demons, and the souls of the dead. The voyage through each of the 12 hours was a distinct and harrowing trial. The bark would sail along a river that flowed through this subterranean world, and at the gateway to each new region, it would have to pass through a massive, heavily guarded gate. These gates were protected by ferocious serpent demons and guardian deities who knew the secret names of the gods. To pass safely, Ra, or a deity speaking on his behalf, had to recite the precise spells and names that would appease these sentinels. Failure meant being barred from proceeding, dooming the world to eternal night. The texts that detailed this journey, like the Amjuat and the Book of Gates, found painted on the walls of pharaohs' tombs, served as a divine guidebook, providing the necessary incantations to navigate this treacherous landscape. But the gates and their guardians were merely the obstacles of the course. The true antagonist, the embodiment of pure chaos and destruction, was the colossal serpent demon known as Apep or Apophis. This creature was not a god to be worshipped, but a force of absolute non-existence, a being of such malevolence that it had no cult and no followers. Its singular goal was to devour Ra and his solar bark, to extinguish the sun forever, and to return the entire universe to the formless, dark waters of chaos that existed before creation. This struggle was the ultimate expression of the Egyptian concept of Maat versus Isfet. Maat was the divine order of the universe, truth, justice, balance, and harmony. Isfet was its opposite, chaos, falsehood, and disorder. Ra's journey was the daily, active maintenance of Maat against the relentless, swallowing tide of Isfet, represented by Apep. The battle against Apep was a collective, cosmic effort. Ra was not alone on his bark. He was accompanied by a crew of powerful deities who acted as his protectors and champions. The wise god Thoth was there, often serving as the navigator and master of magical spells. The war god Seth, in his more positive aspect as a defender of the sun, stood ready at the prow with a great spear to repel the serpent. Most importantly, the serpent goddess Mehen, whose name means the coiled one, would physically wrap her body around the bark's cabin, forming a protective, living shield against Apep's attacks. The confrontation typically occurred at the midpoint of the night, the seventh hour, when the darkness was deepest and Apep's power was at its peak. The serpent would rise from the abyssal waters, its massive coils threatening to crush the boat, its gaping maw ready to swallow the sun whole. Then the battle would erupt in a spectacle of divine fury. Seth would drive his spear into the serpent's hide, while the other gods unleashed powerful magic, binding Apep with spells and hacking it to pieces. Yet this was a victory that could never be permanent. As a force of primordial chaos, Apep could not be destroyed, only defeated for another day. Its pieces would sink back into the waters, only to reform and attack again the following night. This eternal struggle meant that the triumph of order was never guaranteed. It had to be won over and over through vigilance, strength, and sacred knowledge. After surviving this climactic battle, Ra's bark would continue through the later hours of the night, a period of renewal and regeneration. He would merge with Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection, in a powerful union symbolizing the fusion of the creative forces of life with the regenerative power of death. This sacred union infused Ra with new life, preparing him for his rebirth. As the bark approached the eastern horizon, it would be met by the sky goddess Nut, who would swallow the aged, weary form of Ra. He would then travel through her body, being reborn from her womb at dawn as the scarab beetle god Khepri, representing the newly risen sun. The sun that rose each morning was not the same one that had set. It was a god reborn, victorious once more, having secured another day of existence for the world. This entire cosmic process was not just Ra's responsibility alone. The Egyptians believed that the deceased pharaoh, now a divine being himself in the afterlife, played a crucial role in this nightly voyage. After death, the pharaoh was thought to join the crew of the solar bark, adding his own spiritual power to the fight against Apep. He became one of the mighty ones who helped the gods subdue the serpent, ensuring the sun's continued journey. This belief cemented the pharaoh's eternal role as the guardian of Maat on Earth and in the cosmos, his duty to maintain order continuing even beyond the grave. The visuals for this legend are among the most stunning in all of ancient art. Imagine an animation bringing to life the vibrant paintings from the Book of the Dead. We could see the golden solar bark glowing with ethereal light cutting through the oppressive blackness of the Duat. The divine passengers would be locked in combat with Apep, a serpent of immense scale whose body is a tapestry of chaotic, swirling patterns, while protective goddesses like Mehen form a shimmering, coiled barrier of energy around the vessel. The gates of the underworld would loom, each one a massive, ornate structure guarded by hybrid creatures of terrifying aspect, their eyes glowing as they demand the sacred passwords. This legend is a profound expression of the Egyptian mindset. It acknowledges the ever-present threat of chaos, but it champions the idea that through collective action, ritual, and unwavering courage, order and life can and must prevail not just once, but in a beautiful, necessary, and eternal daily cycle. The legends of Osiris and Seti present two of mythology's most powerful testaments to spousal devotion, illustrating how love can defy death itself and, in doing so, reshape the entire world. We have already witnessed the epic of Osiris, his murder by a jealous brother, the frantic search by his wife Isis, and her ultimate success in magically reassembling his dismembered body to conceive their son, Horus. But to understand the full depth of this story, we must focus on the character of Isis and the quality of her love. Her devotion was not a passive sorrow, it was an active, relentless force. When Osiris was slain and his coffin cast into the Nile, Isis did not retreat into mourning within her palace. Instead, she cut her hair, a profound symbol of grief, and transformed herself into a detective of the divine, a wanderer who tracked a river's secret all the way to a foreign shore. Her cunning in retrieving his body from the tamarisk tree pillar demonstrated a wisdom that matched her love, and when Set committed the ultimate desecration, scattering the pieces of Osiris across the land, Isis embarked on a second, even more painstaking quest. She traveled to every nome, every district of Egypt, recovering each fragment. Wherever she found a part of her husband, she erected a shrine, forever weaving the geography of Egypt into the very body of its god. This act of devotional cartography meant that the entire land became sacred, a living monument to her unwavering commitment. Her love was so potent, her magic so profound, that she could temporarily reanimate his form, a fleeting, divine moment of reunion that ensured the continuation of their lineage and the stability of the cosmos. The love of Isis became the ultimate model for Egyptian women and a central pillar of the culture's spirituality, representing the power of loyalty and ritual to conquer even the finality of death. This theme of a wife's devotion, so absolute that it transcends mortal limits, finds a startling and violent parallel in the Hindu tradition, in the story of Shiva and his first wife, Sati. Sati was the daughter of the great Prajapati Daksha, a powerful lord of creation, but her heart belonged to Shiva, the ascetic god who dwelled in cremation grounds smeared in ash, a figure of terrifying power and detachment. Daksha despised Shiva, viewing him as an uncivilized, wild-haired outcast unworthy of his daughter. Despite her father's vehement protests, Sati's love for Shiva was infinite, and she married him, choosing a life of meditation and austerity alongside her husband over the luxurious comfort of her father's court. The conflict reached its climax when Daksha organized a grand sacrificial fire ritual, a yajna, and intentionally invited all the gods and celestial beings, except for Shiva and Sati. This was a public, calculated insult of the highest order. Sati, hearing of the glorious event, decided to attend, believing her presence as Daksha's daughter was her right. Shiva, wary of the insult, tried to dissuade her, but she was determined. Upon her arrival, the scene was worse than she feared. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but Daksha pointedly ignored her. When she confronted him, he launched into a vicious public tirade, heaping insults upon Shiva, mocking his appearance, his habits, and his social status. For Sati, this was an unbearable transgression. Her love for Shiva was the core of her identity, and to hear her husband so profoundly dishonored in front of the entire Pantheon was a wound that could not be borne. In an act of ultimate protest and righteous fury, she declared that since she was born from a body that now insulted her lord, she would no longer inhabit it. She sat down in a meditative pose, focused her immense spiritual energy, and through the sheer force of her will, immolated herself, her body consumed by a sacred internal fire. The news of Sati's death did not reach Shiva as a mere message. He felt it. He felt the cosmic balance shudder as her life force was extinguished. His initial profound grief was a silence that swallowed the universe. Then that silence shattered into a rage so colossal it threatened all of creation. Shiva, the great ascetic, tore a lock of his matted hair and dashed it to the ground, from which sprang Virabhadra, a fearsome warrior deity of immense power, and Bhadrakali, a terrifying goddess commanding a legion of vengeful spirits. He then rose himself and began the Tandava, his divine dance of cosmic destruction. This was not a dance of celebration, but a violent, frenzied performance that made the planets shake and stars fall from the sky. In his immeasurable anguish, he lifted Sati's lifeless body onto his shoulder and continued his dance, whirling across the heavens and the earth, his grief manifesting as an apocalypse. The stability of the universe was crumbling under the weight of his sorrow. The other gods, in a state of pure panic, realized that if Shiva did not stop, everything would be annihilated. They appealed to Vishnu, the preserver, who understood that the source of Shiva's pain was his physical connection to Sati's body. As Shiva danced, Vishnu unleashed his celestial discus, the Sudarshana chakra, which sliced through Sati's body. Piece by piece, her form fell from Shiva's shoulder, scattering across the Indian subcontinent. Wherever a part of her body or an item of her jewelry touched the earth, that spot became infused with a divine, creative energy, a Shakti Pitha or seat of power. It is said that 51 or sometimes 108 of these sacred sites were established from the Kamakhya temple in Assam, where her yoni is believed to have fallen, to other holy sites spread across the length and breadth of the land. When we place these two epic legends side by side, the contrasts in their expression are as revealing as their shared core. Both Isis and Sati embody a spousal devotion that is absolute and active. Isis's love is expressed through relentless seeking, a devotion of preservation and reassembly. She scours the earth to put her husband back together, ensuring his legacy and their dynasty continue. Sati's love, however, is expressed through a fiery self-sacrifice and a subsequent involuntary fragmentation. She destroys her own body to defend her husband's honor, and her body is then scattered by divine intervention to save the cosmos. Isis works within the system, using magic and persistence to overcome tragedy. Sati's act is a radical, system-shattering protest against disrespect. The reactions of their husbands are equally telling. Osiris, the recipient of this devotion, is largely passive in his own resurrection. His story is about what is done for him by the power of his wife's love. Shiva, by contrast, becomes the central, active force of the narrative after Sati's death. His grief is not quiet or internal. It is an external, universe-threatening storm of destruction that requires the intervention of the entire pantheon to contain. The cultural impact of these stories is equally profound. The legend of Isis and Osiris provided the theological foundation for the Egyptian afterlife, offering every soul the hope of resurrection through ritual and devotion, much like Isis accomplished for Osiris. The story of Sati and Shiva, however, gave birth to a sprawling geography of pilgrimage. The Shakti Pithas became some of the most important temples in Hinduism, drawing millions of devotees who honor the goddess in her many forms, ensuring that Sati's sacrifice literally mapped the sacred landscape of India, a permanent reminder that divine love can be both a creative and a destructive force of unimaginable power. After the divine sorrow of Shiva and the cosmic battles of Ra, we find a story that brings the struggle for redemption and greatness down to a more human, albeit superhuman, scale. This is the legend of Hercules, the most celebrated hero of the Greek world, a tale where unimaginable tragedy is met with even more unbelievable perseverance. Unlike the gods born in splendor, Hercules' path to immortality was paved with blood, sweat, and a grief so profound it could only be cleansed through near-impossible trials. His story begins not with a quest for glory, but with a horrific crime committed in a moment of divine madness. Hercules was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, a heritage that made him a target for the relentless jealousy of Hera, Zeus's wife. From his infancy, she sent serpents to kill him in his crib, which the prodigious baby strangled with his bare hands. But Hera's vengeance was not so easily thwarted. When Hercules was a man with a family of his own, the goddess inflicted him with a temporary, raging madness. In this state of uncontrollable fury, he mistook his own wife and children for enemies and slaughtered them. When the fog of insanity lifted, Hercules was confronted with the horrifying truth of his actions. The greatest physical strength in the world was useless against the weight of his guilt and shame. He was utterly broken, a hero condemned by his own hand. Seeking purification, he journeyed to the oracle of Delphi, who told him his path to atonement lay in servitude. He was commanded to travel to Tiryns and for 12 years serve his weak and cowardly cousin, King Eurystheus. It was Eurystheus, advised by Hera, who devised the 12 labors, a series of tasks designed to be impossible, hoping each one would finally kill the hero and remove him as a threat. The brilliance of these labors lies in their variety. They were not merely tests of brute force, but challenges that demanded ingenuity, resilience, and a deep understanding of the natural and supernatural world. The first labor set the tone for the monumental challenges to come, to bring back the skin of the Nemean lion. This was no ordinary beast. Its golden fur was impervious to any weapon, its claws sharper than any mortal sword. Hercules quickly discovered his arrows and club were useless against the creature. After cornering it in its cave, the only way to defeat it was through his own raw power, wrestling it to the ground and eventually strangling it. To skin it, he had to use the lion's own invulnerable claws, a clever solution to an impossible problem. He would later wear its pelt as a helmet and cloak, a permanent trophy of his first great victory and a symbol of his newfound identity. His next great physical trial was the capture of the Erymanthian boar, a gigantic and ferocious beast that was terrorizing the region of Sophis. This labor required not just strength but strategy and endurance. Hercules chased the boar through deep snow into the mountains, wearing it out until he could capture it alive, netting it and carrying the massive, struggling creature back to Eurystheus. The king's reaction to this feat is one of the most comical moments in the epic. He was so terrified by the sight of the raging boar that he hid in a large bronze storage jar, a visual that perfectly captures the contrast between the hero's courage and the ruler's cowardice. Yet among all the labors, one stands out as a testament to sheer intellect over muscle. Cleaning the Augean stables, King Augeas possessed vast herds of cattle, and their stables had not been cleansed in over 30 years, accumulating an unimaginable amount of filth. Eurystheus intended this to be a degrading, Sisyphean task that would take months. Hercules, however, saw a solution in the landscape. Instead of shoveling, he used his massive strength to redirect the course of two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and Peneus, causing them to flow through the stables and wash them completely clean in a single day. This labor infuriated Eurystheus, who claimed it shouldn't count because Hercules had used the rivers and had bargained for a reward. It underscores a key theme of the epic. True heroism involves the mind as much as the body. Perhaps the most symbolic and far-reaching of his labors was the journey to fetch the golden apples of the Hesperides. These apples were not simple fruit. They were a wedding gift from Gaia to Hera, representing immortality and divine knowledge, and they were guarded by a 100-headed dragon named Ladon in a secret garden at the edge of the world. This was less a labor of conquest and more a grand adventure that required help and guidance. Hercules had to wrestle the sea god Nereus for information, free the Titan Prometheus from his chains, and finally, he convinced the Titan Atlas, who held up the sky, to retrieve the apples for him. In a famous moment of cunning, Hercules agreed to take the weight of the heavens onto his own shoulders while Atlas fetched the apples. When Atlas returned, preferring his new freedom, Hercules tricked him into taking the sky back by asking him to hold it for just a moment while he adjusted a pad on his shoulders. This labor demonstrates Hercules' growth. He was no longer just a strongman, but a figure who could navigate the complex politics of gods and titans, using his wits to achieve a goal that pure force could not. To truly bring these incredible feats to life, dynamic animation could capture the visceral energy of each labor. Imagine a sequence for the Nemean lion, showing Hercules' arrows bouncing harmlessly off the beast's hide, leading to a brutal, shadowy struggle inside the cave. For the Augean stables, a wide, sweeping shot could show Hercules, a tiny figure against a mountain, heaving massive boulders to divert the powerful torrents of two entire rivers, the camera following the cleansing wave as it obliterates decades of filth. These moving images would stand in powerful contrast to the static, yet equally powerful, classical art that has preserved his legend for millennia. The metopes from the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, carved in the 5th century BC, are a stunning visual narrative. These sculpted panels depict each labor with a profound sense of order and heroic exertion, freezing moments of struggle into timeless marble. Viewing these ancient artworks alongside modern animations would create a beautiful dialogue across centuries, showing how the image of the hero has endured, even as our methods of storytelling have evolved. The ultimate conclusion of the labors of Hercules is what sets his story apart. After completing all 12 tasks and enduring countless other adventures, he had not only atoned for his sins but had proven his worth beyond any mortal measure. His suffering and his triumphs culminated in his apotheosis. Upon his mortal death, he was welcomed to Mount Olympus, granted immortality, and reconciled with Hera, who even gave him her daughter Hebe as his divine wife. Hercules became a god, a symbol of the ultimate potential within humanity, the idea that through immense struggle, unwavering endurance, and the application of both brawn and brain, even a mortal cursed by fate can achieve a place among the stars. Yet for all the immense strength of Hercules and the cosmic battles of Ra, true power in the Norse world was not always measured in the swing of a hammer or the thrust of a spear. Sometimes the most potent force of all was a single, intoxicating drink, a substance that could alter reality with words alone. This is the legend of the Mead of Poetry, a saga that begins not with a quest but with a truce, and which unravels into a complex tale of murder, betrayal, and ultimate theft that would gift the power of inspiration to the world. Our story starts in the aftermath of the First Great War, a conflict not against giants but between two families of gods. The Aesir, the gods of power and order like Odin and Thor, had fought a long and bitter war against the Vanir, deities of fertility, magic, and earthly wisdom like Njord, Freya, and Freyja. The war had been a stalemate, and exhausted, both sides decided to make peace. To seal their agreement, all the gods, both Aesir and Vanir, gathered around a great vessel, and in a ritual of unity, each one spat into it. This was not an act of disgust, but a profound symbol of their shared essence, a mingling of their divine saliva into a single, sacred liquid. From this collective offering, a being was formed. His name was Kvasir, and he was unlike any other. Born from the combined wisdom of all the gods, he became the wisest being in all the 9 realms. There was no question he could not answer, no problem he could not solve. He traveled the world, sharing his boundless knowledge with all, a living embodiment of the peace that now existed between the divine tribes. But such pure, unadulterated wisdom can be a dangerous thing in a world filled with envy. Kvasir's travels brought him to the home of 2 dwarf brothers, Efjala and Galar. The dwarves, masters of craft and cunning, were consumed by jealousy. They saw Kvasir's wisdom not as a gift to be shared, but as a prize to be hoarded. In an act of shocking treachery, they murdered the gentle sage, but their crime did not end there. Seeing potential in their vile deed, they drained Kvasir's blood and poured it into 3 magical vessels, 2 vats called Sun and Bodden, and a cauldron named Odraria, which means stirrer of inspiration. They then mixed the blood with honey, creating a divine mead. This was no ordinary alcohol, it was a potent magical brew. Anyone who drank it would be gifted with the essence of Kvasir himself, gaining not just knowledge, but the ability to transform that knowledge into beautiful, persuasive, and powerful speech. They would become a skald, a poet whose words could sway kings, win battles, and make their name immortal. To cover their crime, the dwarves told the gods that Kvasir had simply choked on his own vast intelligence, a lie that for a time was believed. The dwarves' bloody path did not end with Kvasir. They soon lured a giant named Gilling and his wife into their home. They took Gilling out on a boat, deliberately capsized it, and drowned him. When his wife came searching, weeping with grief, one of the brothers, claiming he would guide her to a better view of the sea, dropped a millstone on her head from a high ledge. It seemed their reputation for ruthless cunning was secure. However, they had not accounted for Gilling's son, a giant named Suttung. When Suttung learned of his parents' murder, he descended upon the dwarves with furious vengeance. He seized Efjala and Galar and carried them out to a reef that would be submerged at high tide, leaving them to drown. In utter desperation, the dwarves begged for their lives, offering Suttung the one thing of immense value they possessed, the precious mead brewed from Kvasir's blood. Seeing the power he could wield, Suttung accepted their offer and spared them. He took the 3 vessels and carried them back to his fortress deep inside a mountain called Anchnitjorg, which means battering rocks. There he placed the mead in the deepest, most secure chamber and set his daughter Gunnlod to guard it. She was given one simple, solemn duty: to sit with the mead, to protect it with her life, and to never let a single drop be taken. The mead of poetry was now a giant's treasure, hidden away from gods and mortals alike, its power locked behind stone and a single, vigilant guardian. This is where Odin, the All-Father, enters the tale. His relentless quest for knowledge and power, which had already cost him an eye and 9 nights of agony on the world tree, would not allow such a source of inspiration to remain in the hands of a giant. He resolved to steal it, but this would be a mission requiring not strength, but the subtlest forms of deception and seduction. Odin journeyed to the land where Suttung's brother, Borgi, was a farmer. Borgi was struggling. His 9 field hands had mysteriously killed each other with their scythes, leaving him with no one to bring in the harvest. Seeing his opportunity, Odin, calling himself Bolverk, or Worker of Misfortune, approached Borgi and offered a deal. He would single-handedly complete all the work of the 9 men by summer's end, and his only payment would be a single sip of Suttung's precious mead. Borgi, skeptical that Suttung would ever agree but desperate for help, accepted the terms. Odin then took out a whetstone from his cloak and sharpened the scythes of the field hands to a supernatural keenness. The work was done with impossible speed and efficiency, astounding Borgi. When the harvest was complete, Bolverk demanded his payment. Together, Odin and Borgi went to Suttung's mountain fortress. Borgi pleaded with his brother, explaining the bargain, but Suttung flatly refused, laughing at the idea of trading a single drop of the mead for a season's labor. Odin, however, was prepared for this. He persuaded Borgi, who felt a shred of honor-bound obligation, to at least help him try to reach the mead. Using a powerful drill called Ratti, the 2 of them bored a hole deep into the side of the mountain, tunneling through solid rock toward the chamber where Gunnlod kept her vigil. When the drill bit through, Odin, in a stunning feat of transformation, shifted his form into that of a serpent, slithering through the narrow, dark hole and leaving Borgi behind. He emerged into the chamber to find Gunnlod, the giant's daughter, sitting alone with the 3 vessels of mead. For 3 days and 3 nights, Odin stayed with her. He did not fight her or try to snatch the mead by force. Instead, he deployed the most potent weapon in his arsenal, his silver tongue. He wooed her, seducing her with his words and his presence, winning her trust and her heart. Moved by his apparent affection and perhaps lonely in her long vigil, Gunnlod agreed to let him drink from the mead, but Odin's ambition was far greater than a single taste. In one continuous, astonishing feat, he drank the entire contents of all 3 vessels, every last drop of the magical brew. The magic of the mead now surged within him, and his true purpose was revealed. He transformed once more, this time into a mighty eagle, and burst from the mountain, flying with all speed toward Asgard, but Suttung was not far behind. Discovering the theft and his daughter's betrayal, the giant also shapeshifted, taking on the form of another eagle, and gave chase. The 2 great birds raced across the sky, a pursuit that stretched from the world of the giants to the home of the gods. The gods, watching from the walls of Asgard, saw Odin approaching with Suttung close behind. They quickly gathered every container they could find, pots, vats, and cauldrons, and placed them in the courtyard. As Odin the eagle swooped over the walls of the fortress, he regurgitated the entire mass of the mead of poetry into the waiting vessels. In his frantic haste, however, a few drops fell from his beak, splashing out into the world beyond the walls. This lesser portion became the share of bad poets and clumsy writers, the source of uninspired verse and mediocre art, but the vast majority was saved, secured by the gods. Suttung, thwarted, was forced to turn back. This incredible, bloody, and convoluted journey explains the very nature of poetic inspiration. The mead, born from a sacred peace corrupted by murder, brewed in betrayal, hidden by greed, and won through seduction, becomes a perfect metaphor for the creative process itself, a tumultuous, often painful, but ultimately transcendent endeavor. It was Odin's final, cunning theft that delivered this power to both gods and humanity, ensuring that the gift of poetry, the magic of words shaped with wisdom and grace, would forever be a part of our world, a direct result of the All-Father's willingness to descend into any darkness, assume any form, and break any heart to secure the tools of understanding for all. But while Odin's theft of the mead reveals the great lengths a god will go to seize power and wisdom for themselves and their people, our next legend presents a god's journey in the opposite direction, a voluntary surrender of all power, a descent into the realm of death not to conquer but to submit. From the cold skies of the Norse world, we travel back to the Fertile Crescent, to the world's first cities, where the Sumerians told a story so profound it echoes across 5,000 years. This is the descent of Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, a myth that explores the terrifying price of confronting the one thing even a goddess cannot command, her own shadow. Inanna was the most vibrant and powerful of the Sumerian deities. She was the goddess of love, fertility, and warfare, the planet Venus gleaming in the sky, the life force that fueled both the bedroom and the battlefield. She ruled from her glorious city of Uruk, adorned in her sacred symbols, the lapis lazuli necklace, the royal robe, the queenly crown, and the rod and ring of office. Yet, despite possessing everything, she was drawn to the one realm that was not hers, the underworld known as Chur or Urkala. This was not a journey born of curiosity, but of a deliberate, ambitious challenge. Her sister, Ereshkigal, ruled there as the lonely, fearsome queen of the dead. Where Inanna was all dynamic external life, Ereshkigal was the still, silent, and inevitable end of all things. It was a confrontation between two halves of a whole, and Inanna, in her celestial pride, resolved to descend and witness the funeral rites of Ereshkigal's husband, the Gugalana, though many scholars believe this was merely a pretext for a power grab, an attempt to usurp her sister's dark throne. Understanding the peril, Inanna instructed her loyal vizier, Ninshubur, to wait for 3 days and 3 nights. If she did not return, Ninshubur was to raise a lament in the temples and then seek help from the great gods, starting with her grandfather, Enlil, and then her father, Nanna. But if they refused, she was to go to the god of wisdom and fresh waters, Enki, in his watery abode of Eridu. With her safety net in place, Inanna set her heart toward the underworld and approached its great, lapis lazuli-adorned gate. The journey that followed is one of the most psychologically potent sequences in all of mythology. She was met at the first gate by Neti, the chief gatekeeper of the underworld. He demanded to know why she had come. When Inanna declared she wished to witness the funeral rites, Neti, acting on Ereshkigal's instructions, told her she could enter, but only if she observed the ancient customs of the underworld. At each of the 7 gates, a piece of her regalia, a symbol of her identity and power, was taken from her. The process was a systematic deconstruction of the self. Visualize this dramatic, haunting progression. At the first gate, her towering crown was removed. At the second, her lapis lazuli necklace. At the third, her sparkling beads. At the fourth, the gleaming pins from her breast. At the fifth, the girdle of birthstones from her hips. At the sixth, the bracelets from her wrists and ankles. And finally, at the 7th and last gate, the royal robe itself was stripped from her body. Imagine an animation based on ancient Sumerian cylinder seals and palace reliefs, showing the majestic goddess, her form shrinking and becoming less radiant with each gate she passes through. The colors would drain from the scene, the vibrant blues and golds of her divine attire giving way to the monotonous, dusty gray of the underworld. Her confident stride would become a hesitant shuffle until she stood completely naked, bowed low, and utterly powerless before the throne of her sister. This stripping away was not just a punishment, it was a necessary purification for entering a realm where worldly status and power held no meaning. To stand before the raw truth of death, one must be stripped of every illusion of life. Ereshkigal, the queen of the great below, sat upon her throne. She had been in labor, experiencing the pangs of childbirth, a symbol of her own creative and destructive power. Seeing her vibrant sister, the embodiment of everything she was not, filled her with a rage born of pain and isolation. As Inanna entered the throne room and made a move for the throne itself, Ereshkigal fixed her with the eye of death. She did not argue or fight, she simply unleashed her divine authority. The Anuna, the 7 judges of the underworld, passed their sentence against Inanna for her arrogance, and Ereshkigal executed it. She turned Inanna into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, and hung her on a hook on the wall. The Queen of Heaven was now a lifeless slab, suspended in the silent darkness. The animation here could be stark and terrifying, a single hook in a vast, shadowy chamber, with Inanna's inert form dangling, a shocking contrast to her former glory. Up in the world of the living, the 3 days and nights passed with no sign of Inanna. The earth grew barren, love, fertility, and war all ceased their cycles. True to her word, Ninchuba raised a great lament, dressing in the clothes of a mourner and rushing from temple to temple. She first went to Enlil in Nippur, but he refused to help, stating that Inanna had chosen to go to the underworld and must face the consequences. She then went to Nanna in and he gave the same cold reply. Inanna's ambition had alienated the highest powers. Finally, Ninchuba went to Enki in Eridu. The wise god of the abyssal waters, who understands the nature of all things, was deeply troubled. He understood that without Inanna, life itself could not continue. From the dirt under his fingernails, Enki fashioned 2 strange, genderless creatures called the Gala Tura and the Ker Jara. They were neither male nor female, able to move between realms and states of being. He gave them the food of life and the water of life, and instructed them to fly like flies to the underworld. They found Ereshkigal moaning in agony on her throne, crying out, "Oh! Oh, my inside!" The 2 creatures, instead of confronting her, mirrored her cries, echoing her pain. "Oh, oh, your inside!" They wailed with her. They sat with her in her suffering, offering not judgment but empathy. For the first time, the lonely queen of the dead was not alone in her grief. Moved by their compassion, Ereshkigal offered them a gift, but the creatures, as Enki had instructed, asked only for the corpse hanging on the hook. Ereshkigal granted their request. They took the lifeless body of Inanna and sprinkled it 60 times with the food of life and 60 times with the water of life. Slowly, the goddess began to stir, to breathe, to live again. She was revived, but the laws of the underworld were absolute. No one who enters the land of the dead may leave it unless they provide a substitute to take their place. As Inanna ascended back through the 7 gates, her divine attributes were returned to her one by one, but she was followed by a troop of relentless, faceless Gala demons, sent to ensure she did not cheat the ancient decree. When she emerged into the world, she found that life had gone on without her. Her vizier, Ninchuba, had mourned her truly and was spared, but when she found her husband, the shepherd king Dumuzid, he was not mourning. He was seated on her throne in Yorok, dressed in his finest robes, celebrating and playing music. He had not expected her return and had readily assumed her power. In a fury of betrayal, Inanna looked upon him and gave him to the Gala demons. "Take him," she declared. Dumuzid, terrified, fled, and a dramatic chase ensued across the Sumerian landscape. He begged his sister, the scribe goddess Jeshtanana, for help, and she, in an act of profound love, agreed to share his fate. A deal was brokered, blessed by the sun god Utu. Dumuzid would spend half the year in the underworld, and Jeshtanana would take his place for the other half. This is the mythic explanation for the cycle of the seasons. When Dumuzid is in the underworld, the world enters the barren, hot summer, a time of mourning and death. When he returns to the land of the living with the autumn rains, life and fertility blossom once more. The descent of Inanna is far more than an ancient weather report. It is a staggering exploration of the necessity of embracing our own darkness. Inanna cannot become whole until she confronts Ereshkigal, the shadow self that holds the power of death and transformation. Her journey teaches that true power involves vulnerability, the surrender of the ego, and an acceptance of the cycles of loss and renewal that govern not just the fields of grain, but the deepest chambers of the human soul. Now let's turn from tales of underworld descents and personal sacrifice to witness the ultimate conflicts, the battles that forge the very fabric of reality. These are the stories of cosmic order confronting primordial chaos, and in two of the ancient world's most powerful civilizations, this drama unfolds with stunningly similar themes, pitting a heroic storm god against a monstrous, watery embodiment of disorder. First, we journey to the Vedic world of ancient India, where the king of the gods, the formidable Indra, faced his greatest challenge. The cosmos was parched, dying. The serpent demon Vritra, whose name means the enveloper, had coiled his colossal, limbless body around the celestial mountains, trapping all the world's waters and holding them hostage. He was a being of drought and inertia, a power of pure obstruction that prevented the flow of life itself. Indra, a god of immense power and vitality, known for his thunderous might and his prodigious consumption of the sacred intoxicant soma, prepared for war. His weapon was the Vajra, the thunderbolt. This was no ordinary lightning. It was a divine instrument forged by the master artisan Tivashtri, said to be made from the bones of the sage Dadhichi, who willingly gave his life for its creation. It was indestructible, a concentrated force of cosmic energy. The battle was a cataclysm. Indra, fueled by sacred strength, charged against the great dragon. He hurled the Vajra with all his divine fury, striking Vritra and shattering the serpent's coils. The waters, released from their prison, cascaded down upon the earth like a roaring, life-giving army, flowing into the rivers and streams, reviving the land and heralding the dawn of a new, fertile age. In this myth, Indra is more than a warrior. He is a champion of life and dynamism, the one who slays the hoarder of potential and sets the processes of the world into motion, establishing his reign by defeating the force of stagnation. Meanwhile, in the sun-baked river valleys of Mesopotamia, a similar, yet even more fundamental, drama was recounted in the great creation epic, the Enuma Elish. Here, the universe began not with a single god, but with a mingling of primordial waters, the fresh waters, Apsu, and the salt waters, Tiamat. From their union, generations of gods were born. But their divine clamor and energy disturbed the quiet slumber of Apsu, who plotted to destroy them. The clever god E thwarted this plan, slaying Apsu and establishing his own dwelling upon the slain god's body. This act, however, provoked an even greater wrath. Tiamat, the primordial mother, now raged at the death of her consort. She transformed from a benign, generative force into a terrifying agent of chaos. She created a horde of monstrous allies, including sharp-toothed serpents, ferocious dragons, and the scorpion man, and appointed her new lover, Kingu, as their general, placing the tablets of destiny upon his chest, granting him supreme authority. The pantheon of younger gods was thrown into a panic. No one dared face the apocalyptic fury of the enraged Tiamat. In their desperation, they turned to the young storm god, Marduk, the son of E. He agreed to confront the chaos monster, but only on one condition: that if he succeeded, the gods would grant him unquestioned and eternal kingship over the entire pantheon. The gods, with no other hope, agreed, bestowing upon him a royal throne and an invincible arsenal. What followed was the first and ultimate cosmic battle. Marduk harnessed the four winds, creating a tempest to disorient the massive Tiamat. He rode forth in his storm chariot, drawn by four fearsome creatures, his body clad in terrifying armor, and a net held in his grasp to ensnare his foe. When Tiamat saw him, she let out a roar that shook the foundations of the abyss and charged, her mouth wide open, a chasm of chaos ready to consume him. But Marduk was cunning. As she charged, he forced the evil winds into her gaping maw, inflating her body and holding her jaws agape. Then he let fly his ultimate weapon, a divine arrow that shot directly into her distended belly, piercing her heart and splitting her insides. He stood upon her lifeless form and with one final blow clove her skull. The roaring chaos was silenced, but Marduk's work had only just begun. He then performed the most profound act of creation through destruction. He took the colossal, bifurcated body of the mother of all and began to craft the ordered universe. With one half of her carcass, he created the heavens, pinning it up to hold back the upper waters. With the other half, he fashioned the earth. From her spittle, he formed the clouds and the mists. He directed the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from her eyes, and from her teats he carved out the great mountains. He set the constellations in their courses and established the cycles of day and night. Finally, to serve the gods so they could live in leisure, he used the blood of the executed Kingu to create the first human beings. Marduk was not just a warrior, he was the ultimate architect, transforming the raw, chaotic material of the defeated enemy into the structured, habitable world. The parallels between these two epic legends are as illuminating as their differences. Both Indra and Marduk are storm deities who wield immense, world-shattering power. Their adversaries, Vritra and Tiamat, are both deeply associated with water and represent a state of undifferentiated, unproductive chaos that must be overcome for life to flourish. Both gods are celebrated as heroic kings who establish and maintain cosmic order, what the Hindus call Rita and the Babylonians understood as the divine decree of the gods. Yet the scope of their actions reveals a crucial distinction. Indra's battle is one of liberation. He releases the waters that already exist, defeating a creature that is obstructing the natural flow of the cosmos. Marduk's battle, however, is one of true creation. Tiamat is not merely an obstructor, she is the very substance of the pre-creation universe. By slaying her and fashioning the world from her corpse, Marduk brings structure into being from the raw material of chaos itself. His victory is therefore more foundational, marking the transition from a formless, potential state to a tangible, ordered reality. To truly grasp the grandeur of these myths, imagine them brought to life through epic animation. For Indra and Vritra, we could see the serpent coiled like a living mountain range around glowing, imprisoned rivers, with the god Indra radiating golden light, hurling a vajra that fractures the sky and the dragon's body simultaneously, releasing a cataclysmic, life-giving deluge. For Marduk and Tiamat, the visuals would be even more profound. A monstrous, dragon-like Tiamat, her form a swirling vortex of saltwater and darkness, leading a horde of nightmare creatures against the lone, resplendent Marduk who commands the very elements. The climactic moment of her defeat and the subsequent, meticulous construction of the cosmos from her dismembered body would be a sequence of both terrifying violence and breathtaking creativity. These stories are not just ancient fantasies, they are the fundamental narratives through which two great cultures explained their place in the world, asserting that the order we depend on, the rising sun, the flowing rivers, the very ground beneath our feet, was won in a spectacular, primordial struggle against the forces of utter chaos. But the dynamics of power in the Norse cosmos are not only challenged by external giants or internal betrayals, they are also threatened from within the very family of the gods themselves, born from a union of chaos and cunning. We now delve into one of the most foreboding and thematically rich legends in the entire Pantheon, the story of the children of Loki. This is not a tale of heroic deeds or humorous pranks, but a dark and prophetic narrative about the inescapable nature of fate and how the very acts taken to prevent a prophecy can set its gears in motion. The story begins with Loki's union with the giantess Angerboda, whose name ominously means she who brings grief. From their home in Jotunheim, the land of the giants, 3 children were born, each one a being of such immense and terrifying power that they were destined to become the architects of the gods' downfall. These were not mere monsters, they were cosmic forces given form, and their existences were a ticking clock counting down to Ragnarok. The first of these dreaded offspring was Fenrir, the great wolf. From his earliest days as a pup, he exhibited an unnatural and alarming rate of growth, his strength increasing with every passing moment. But it was not just his physical power that terrified the Aesir. It was a grim prophecy spoken by the Norns, the weavers of destiny. They foretold that during the final battle of Ragnarok, Fenrir would break free from his bonds and devour Odin himself, the All-Father. This vision of their king being consumed by the wolf cast a long shadow over the golden halls of Asgard, turning their divine home into a gilded prison awaiting its own destruction. The gods' first attempts to bind Fenrir with the massive chains leading and Dromi were futile. The wolf shattered them with ease. Their desperation led them to the dwarves of Svartalfheim, who crafted Gleipnir, a binding made not of iron but of impossible things. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. This silken, seemingly fragile ribbon was a knot of pure enchantment that no amount of physical strength could break. To convince the suspicious Fenrir to be bound, the god Tyr, the only one who had ever shown the wolf honesty, placed his own right hand in the beast's mouth as a pledge of good faith. When the wolf realized the betrayal and found himself trapped, his jaws snapped shut, severing Tyr's hand. The gods then dragged the bound Fenrir to a desolate rock, secured him with the chain Gelgjur, and wedged a sword between his jaws to silence his agonized howls, which now form a river called Van. There he lies, bound and gagged, his hatred festering, waiting for the day he will fulfill his destiny. The second child was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Recognizing the immense threat posed by this growing creature, Odin himself took action. He journeyed from Asgard and, seizing the serpent, hurled it into the vast, encircling ocean that surrounded the mortal realm of Midgard. But Jormungandr did not perish in the depths. Instead, it grew to such an unimaginable size that it eventually encircled the entire world, its tail held in its own mouth, forming an unbreakable loop around the lands of men. This colossal being, often referred to as the world serpent, lies in the deep, its immense coils resting on the ocean floor, its presence a constant, latent threat. The animosity between the serpent and the gods is most famously exemplified in Thor's fishing trip, where the thunder god, using an ox head as bait, nearly succeeded in hauling the monstrous serpent onto his boat, only to have it escape at the last moment. This encounter foreshadows their final, fated confrontation, where it is prophesied that Thor and Jormungandr will slay each other in a mutual, world-shattering blow during Ragnarok. The third and perhaps most complex of Loki's children is Hel. She was born a goddess, but her appearance was chillingly divided. One half of her body was that of a beautiful, living woman, while the other half was that of a blue-black, decaying corpse. The gods, disturbed by her presence and the ominous aura she carried, appointed her as the ruler of a newly created realm which came to bear her name, Helheim. This was the underworld for those who did not die a glorious death in battle. It was not a place of torment like the Christian hell, but a cold, misty, and joyless hall where the common dead, those who perished from sickness or old age, led a shadowy, passive existence. Eldjudnir, her hall within this realm, is described as a place of starvation and monotony, a stark contrast to the vibrant feasting in Valhalla. Hel herself is a figure of immense and somber authority, a necessary part of the cosmic order, yet her very existence is a reminder of the fate that awaits most mortals and ultimately the gods themselves. Her role in the death of the beloved god Balder is crucial. When he is killed by Loki's trickery, it is to Hel's domain that he travels, and it is Hel who sets the condition for his potential return. A condition Loki ensures is never met, sealing Balder's fate and hastening the coming of the end. When envisioning these three pivotal figures, their character designs should reflect their distinct natures and their shared apocalyptic purpose. Fenrir should be depicted not just as a large wolf, but as a creature of pure primordial fury. His design could incorporate elements of his bonds, with ethereal, glowing traces of the magical Gleipnir still visible around his legs and scars around his maw from the sword that gagged him. His eyes should burn with an intelligent, vengeful fire. For Jormungandr, the scale must be cosmic. An effective visual would show the serpent's colossal body not just in the water, but seen from a celestial perspective, its coils wrapped so tightly around the disk of Midgard that its scaly back forms mountain ranges beneath the oceans. Its head, when risen from the deep, should be a leviathan capable of blotting out the sky. Hel's design must capture her duality. One side of her face and body should be serene and beautiful, perhaps with pale, smooth skin and elegant features, while the other side is skeletal and necrotic, with exposed bone and withered flesh. Her clothing could be similarly split, a fine robe on one side and funerary shrouds on the other. She should be seated on a dark throne, exuding an aura of cold, impartial authority. For historical reference, artifacts like the Gosforth Cross in Cumbria, England, provide stunning visual evidence of these myths from the Viking Age. This stone cross, a fusion of Christian and Norse symbolism, features intricate carvings that many scholars interpret as scenes from Ragnarok, including a figure often identified as Vidar, a son of Odin, tearing apart the jaws of a great beast, likely Fenrir, in an act of vengeance for his father. These ancient depictions connect the legends directly to the artistic expression of the people who believed in them. The profound significance of Loki's children lies in their inescapable connection to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. They are not random villains, but essential components of the Norse apocalyptic worldview. Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel represent forces that the gods themselves, through their own fear and actions, help to create and empower. The binding of Fenrir, the casting out of Jormungandr, and the banishment of Hel were all attempts to control a prophesied fate. Yet these very acts ensured that when the end times came, these beings would be filled with a hatred and power that would make them unstoppable. They are destined to break free and lead the charge against the divine order. Fenrir will kill Odin, Jormungandr and Thor will slay each other, and the dead from Hel's vast army will sail forth to besiege the gods. This legend presents a universe where destiny is not a suggestion, but a fixed track, and where even the most powerful beings are ultimately powerless to prevent their own destruction. It is a stark, powerful, and deeply resonant mythology that embraces the beauty and tragedy of an ending that gives meaning to every story that came before it. From the frozen north and its prophecies of an inescapable twilight, we journey now across the ocean to a world where the sun's very existence was not a certainty, but a fragile achievement, maintained daily through a sacred, terrifying pact between gods and humanity. In the high-altitude basin of central Mexico, the Aztecs gazed at the sky and saw not a permanent celestial body, but a desperate, vibrating star perpetually on the brink of collapse, its survival dependent on the one thing humanity could offer, the vital force within their own bodies. This profound and sobering worldview is encapsulated in one of their most complex and foundational legends, the myth of the five suns, a cosmogony of successive creations and destructions that explains our precarious place in a universe already living on borrowed time. The Aztecs believed that our world was not the first, but the fifth in a series of cosmic cycles, each ruled by a different sun and each ending in a total cataclysmic annihilation. The memory of these previous worlds was preserved in their sacred calendars and codices, a haunting chronicle of divine experimentation and failure. The first age was the son of Earth, known as Nahui Oslotl. Its inhabitants were giants who subsisted on pine nuts, living in a primordial world. But this world came to a brutal end when the great deity Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, was knocked from his celestial position by his rival Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. In his rage and fall, Tezcatlipoca transformed into a jaguar, and he summoned a horde of monstrous jaguars that devoured every last giant, bringing the first sun to a close. The Second Age, the Son of Wind, or Nahui Ehecatl, was populated by humans who survived on the seeds of the mesquite tree. This era was presided over by Quetzalcoatl himself, but it met its fate when Tezcatlipoca, seeking revenge, violently displaced his rival. As Quetzalcoatl was cast down, his fall unleashed hurricanes of unimaginable force that scoured the world, scattering its people and transforming them into monkeys, who are said to be the lone survivors clinging to the treetops in a now barren landscape. The Third Age was the son of fire rain, Nahui Quehuatl. Its people lived on a grain known as aquatic maize, and it was ruled by the rain god Tlaloc. This world met its end when Quetzalcoatl, in his turn, orchestrated a rain of fire upon the earth. The sky itself seemed to weep embers and molten rock, consuming everything in a global volcanic eruption so intense that the very stones boiled and the inhabitants were transformed into butterflies, dogs, and turkeys. The fourth and most poignant age was the son of water, Nahui Atl. This world was inhabited by humans who survived on a wild aquatic grain called a Sicintli, and it was governed by Tlaloc's consort, the water goddess Chalchutlicu. She loved her people, but the era ended in a great flood, a deluge that lasted for 52 years. The skies opened and did not close, drowning the world and transforming all of humanity into fish. This cycle of creation and destruction establishes a pattern of instability and divine conflict, a universe where no world is permanent and every age carries the seed of its own inevitable dramatic end. This harrowing history of cosmic collapse sets the stage for the creation of our own world, the fifth sun, known as Nahui Olan, the sun of movement. The gods understood that for a new age to begin, a new sun was required, but this sun would have to be different. It would require a sacrifice of such profound magnitude that it would fuel the very motion of the cosmos. The legend tells us that the gods gathered in the primordial darkness at the sacred city of Teotihuacan, the place where gods are born. A massive divine bonfire was lit, its flames licking the void, and the question was posed, who among them would have the courage to leap into the pyre and become the new sun? Two deities stepped forward. The first was Tecusistecatl, a wealthy and proud god, adorned with rich feathers and gold. The second was Nanahuatzin, a humble, poor, and diseased god covered in boils, who sustained himself on the scraps and offerings others left behind. Tecusistecatl, confident in his own status, approached the fire first, but when he felt its blistering, terrifying heat, he recoiled in fear, unable to make the final leap. He tried 4 times and failed 4 times. Then it was Nanahuatzin's turn. Without a moment of hesitation, filled with resolve and humility, he closed his eyes and hurled himself directly into the heart of the inferno, his body instantly consumed by the sacred flames. Shamed by the courage of the lowly god, Tecusistecatl gathered his own courage and leaped in after him. As the gods watched, the sky began to lighten. The first to rise was Nanahuatzin, transformed. Glowing with a brilliant, blinding light, he had become the sun to Natia. Soon after, Tecusistecatl rose as well, becoming the moon Metztli, shining with a dimmer, reflected light. But a terrible problem immediately became apparent. The sun and the moon hung motionless in the sky, fixed in place. They had been created, but they lacked the energy to move. The gods realized that the sacrifice was not yet complete. The sun demanded nourishment. It required the precious, life-sustaining substance that animated the gods themselves, blood. In an act of collective devotion and necessity, the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, took a sacred knife and performed a ritual of auto-sacrifice, drawing blood from his own body and offering it to the sun. The other gods followed his lead, giving their blood, their essence, to set the sun on its course. It was this divine sacrifice that established the fundamental principle of the fifth sun: movement requires sustenance. The sun would not move on its own, it had to be fed. And when humanity was created shortly thereafter, from the ground-up bones of the previous ages mixed with the blood of the gods, this sacred duty of nourishment was passed down to them. The sun's hunger was not a one-time event but a perpetual, daily need. To prevent the sun from stalling and the world from collapsing back into the darkness that preceded it, humanity had to provide it with its favorite food, chalchuatl, or precious water, human blood. This was the theological foundation for the practice of human sacrifice that so defined and horrified the outside world's view of the Aztecs. It was not born of mere bloodlust but of a profound, desperate, and universally shared responsibility. The sacrifices, whether through heart extraction on the tops of pyramids or the ritual gladiatorial combat of the Tlaquequizquiahuistli festival, were seen as the highest form of civic and cosmic duty. The victim was often called Ixiptla, a representative or impersonator of a god, and their death was a sacred transaction, a recycling of the life force that kept the fragile gears of the universe turning for another day, another cycle, postponing the inevitable end of the fifth sun, which, according to their belief, would be destroyed by a great earthquake. To truly grasp the power of this narrative, we must visualize it through the art and architecture the Aztecs left behind. Imagine scenes from the famous Aztec sunstone, often mistakenly called the calendar stone. This colossal sculpture is not merely a timekeeping device, it is a diagram of the entire Aztec cosmos. At its center is the face of Tonatiuh, the fifth sun, his tongue protruding as a flint knife, symbolizing his hunger for sacrificial blood. Encircling him are the four previous suns, each with the date of its destruction, a stark reminder of the world's cyclical and transient nature. We can also envision a dramatic recreation of the sacred city of Teotihuacan, its vast pyramid of the sun and pyramid of the moon silent under a starry sky. An animation could bring to life the gathering of the gods, the towering bonfire, and the two contrasting figures, the resplendent Tecucisticatl hesitating at the edge of the light, and the humble, determined Nanahuatzin launching himself into oblivion to be reborn as the brilliant star that makes our own lives possible. This legend forces us to confront a world view where existence is a collaborative, costly effort between the divine and the mortal, a universe balanced on a knife's edge, where the very light that allows us to see is paid for day after day with the ultimate price. From the cosmic struggles that forged worlds and the great sacrifices that fuel the sun, we turn now to a legend of a more intimate, yet equally world-altering tragedy. This is the story of a mother's love so profound that her grief could silence the song of the earth itself, a tale from the heart of ancient Greece that explains the very rhythm of the seasons. It begins not with thunder or war, but in a sun-drenched Sicilian meadow where the young goddess Persephone, daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, was gathering flowers with her companions. The air was sweet with the scent of roses, lilies, and violets, and the world was in a state of perpetual, bountiful spring, a direct reflection of her mother's joyful and nurturing presence. But on this day, Persephone's eye was caught by a flower of astonishing beauty, a narcissus, its 100 blossoms radiating a fragrance so intoxicating it seemed to captivate the very air. As she reached out to pluck it, the earth beneath her feet suddenly cleaved open. From the yawning chasm emerged a chariot of polished ebony, drawn by immortal, dark-maned horses, and at its reins was the formidable Hades, lord of the underworld. In a single, swift motion, he seized the terrified young goddess and pulled her down into the depths. The chasm sealed above them as if it had never been, leaving behind only a few scattered flowers and a chilling silence where her cries had echoed. Demeter, feeling a shudder in the very fabric of life, heard the fading echo of her daughter's scream. The word abducted tore through her divine consciousness, and a cold dread, unlike any she had ever known, gripped her heart. She cast aside her divine responsibilities and descended to the mortal world, her form now that of an aged, grieving woman. For 9 days and 9 nights she wandered the earth, her cloak of sorrow casting a pall over the land. She refused to eat, to drink, or to rest, consumed by a single, desperate purpose: to find her daughter. She asked everyone she met, nymphs, satyrs, and mortals, but they were all struck with a mysterious fear, too terrified of Hades' wrath to speak the truth. The earth, sensitive to its mistress's anguish, began to mirror her despair. The vibrant green fields began to fade to a pale yellow. Flowers wilted and died without blooming. The soil grew hard and cold, and the first frost, a thing previously unknown, began to creep across the land. Life was receding, and the world was experiencing its first bitter winter, not from any cosmic decree, but from the broken heart of its most nurturing deity. It was the sun god Helios, who sees all from his celestial chariot, who finally took pity on the raving goddess and revealed the terrible truth. Persephone had been taken to the underworld by Hades, and this act had been sanctioned by Zeus himself, who had given his brother permission to take her as his bride. This revelation struck Demeter with the force of a thunderbolt. Not only was her daughter lost, but her own brother had conspired in the theft. A new, righteous fury ignited within her. This was no longer just a search, it was a strike. She withdrew her power from the world completely, and the great famine began. Crops failed utterly, the earth cracked open in great fissures, and livestock perished. Humanity faced extinction, and with no mortals left to offer sacrifices, the gods on Olympus began to grow weak. The cosmic order was unraveling. In her grief and rage, Demeter found her way to the city of Eleusis, still disguised as an old woman. There she was taken in by the royal family and offered the position of nurse to their infant son, Demophon. In a bittersweet attempt to find solace, she grew fond of the child and, seeking to grant him immortality, anointed him with ambrosia and held him each night in the hearth's sacred fire to burn away his mortal nature. When the queen, Metanera, discovered this and screamed in terror, Demeter cast off her disguise. Revealed in all her divine glory, she commanded the people of Eleusis to build her a great temple, and there she sat in her temple at Eleusis, a monument to stubborn, world-ending sorrow. The famine deepened, and Zeus, finally understanding the catastrophic consequences of his decision, was forced to intervene. He sent messenger after messenger to plead with Demeter, but she was immovable. She declared that she would never restore life to the earth, that she would let the world remain a frozen, barren rock until she set eyes upon her daughter once more. Zeus had no choice. He commanded his brother Hades to release Persephone. Meanwhile, in the sunless realm of the underworld, a complex drama was unfolding. Persephone had initially been a prisoner, grieving and refusing to eat in the land of the dead, for consuming its food would bind her there forever. Yet Hades was not the monstrous captor one might imagine. He was a stern and solemn god, but he grew to love his queen and offered her not a dungeon but a throne. He made her the rightful ruler of the underworld, granting her authority over all the shades of the dead. Over time, a change began to stir within Persephone. She was no longer just the innocent maiden of the fields. She was being transformed into a powerful, chthonic queen. Just as Hermes arrived with Zeus's command for her release, a moment of tragic irony occurred. As she prepared to leave, a gardener of the underworld, acting on Hades' secret command, offered her a pomegranate. In her joy at the prospect of freedom, or perhaps with a new, burgeoning connection to her dark kingdom, Persephone accepted and ate 7 of the ruby-red seeds. This single, simple act carried the weight of cosmic law. By consuming the food of the dead, she had tied her soul to the underworld. Her return to the surface was a moment of transcendent joy. Demeter, sensing her daughter's approach, rushed from her temple, and the moment they embraced, the ice began to melt and a faint green hue returned to the fields. But their reunion was shadowed by the truth of the pomegranate seeds. A final compromise brokered by Zeus was decreed. Because Persephone had eaten the food of the underworld, she was bound to return to Hades for 1 month for each seed she had consumed. Thus, for 4 months of the year, or in some versions 6, she must reign as queen of the dead beside her husband. During this time, Demeter mourns, and the earth enters the quiet death of autumn and the deep sleep of winter. But when Persephone ascends each year to walk the world of light, her mother's joy erupts in a blaze of color and life, bringing forth the vibrant blossoms of spring and the abundant harvest of summer. This Eleusinian mystery, celebrated for centuries in secret rites, is one of mythology's most beautiful and profound explorations of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. It teaches that loss is a part of growth, that descent can lead to transformation, and that even in the deepest darkness, the promise of return is eternally sealed. To visualize this legend, imagine a scene transitioning from the idyllic meadow, with Persephone reaching for the fateful Narcissus, to the stark, beautiful sculptures of classical antiquity. We could see the famous statue of Demeter from Knidos, her face etched with a sorrow that seems to make the very marble weep, and then the vibrant, hopeful reliefs from Eleusis depicting the joyous return of the daughter, a single pomegranate held in her hand, a quiet symbol of the dual kingdom she now commands. Yet even in the most carefully ordered life, as dictated by celestial cycles or the strictures of royal duty, chaos can descend in a single, fateful moment, tearing a beloved soul from the world of light into the heart of shadow. This is the core of one of the world's greatest and most enduring stories, the ancient Indian epic of the Ramayana, a sprawling legend that has shaped the spiritual and cultural landscape of an entire continent for millennia. At its heart lies a profound and personal tragedy, the abduction of Sita, an act of transgression that would ignite an epic war and define the very concepts of righteousness and devotion for countless generations. Our story begins in the idyllic, prosperous kingdom of Kosala, ruled by the wise and just King Dasharatha. His eldest son, Prince Rama, is the embodiment of virtue, a paragon of strength, courage, and most importantly, an unwavering commitment to his dharma, his sacred duty. He is married to the beautiful and virtuous Princess Sita, who is not only his wife but his spiritual equal, her own purity and devotion mirroring his own nobility. Their life is one of perfect harmony, a golden age seemingly destined to last forever. But in the royal court, a twist of fate, driven by the scheming of one of Dasharatha's queens, forces the king's hand. Bound by a sacred promise, the heartbroken Dasharatha is compelled to exile Rama to the forest for 14 years and install another son on the throne. Without a moment of hesitation or resentment, Rama accepts this cruel decree, for to disobey his father would be to violate his dharma. His loyal wife Sita and his devoted brother Lakshmana refuse to let him go alone, and the three of them voluntarily abandon the luxuries of the palace for the harsh, unpredictable life of the Dandaka forest. This voluntary exile is the first great test of their character, a powerful lesson in sacrificing personal comfort for the sake of a higher principle. For years, they live a simple, ascetic life, building a humble hut and living in harmony with the sages and creatures of the wilderness. But their peace is an illusion, for the forest is also a realm of lurking danger, home to powerful and malevolent demons known as Rakshasas. Their king is the 10-headed, 20-armed Ravana, the mighty ruler of the Golden Island fortress of Lanka. He is a being of immense power, a great scholar and devotee of the god Shiva, yet his wisdom is corrupted by an insatiable ego and lust. His court is filled with reports of Rama, the prince who single-handedly defeats his demonic hordes. One of his demonic siblings, the hideous ogress Sapanaka, encounters the trio in the forest. Enamored by Rama's handsome form, she proposes to him only to be scorned. In a rage, she attacks Sita, and in defense, Lakshmana draws his sword and cuts off her nose and ears. Humiliated and enraged, Sapanaka flees to her brother, the Demon King. She does not just complain of her mutilation, she cunningly describes the unparalleled beauty and virtue of Sita, knowing that such a description would ignite Ravana's most vulnerable desire. She tells him that Sita is a jewel among women, a prize worthy of the greatest emperor, and that she must be his. Ravana's heart is instantly consumed with an obsessive need to possess her. He becomes determined to take Sita by any means necessary, seeing her not as a person, but as the ultimate object to validate his own power and satisfy his craving. Ravana understands that a direct assault on the formidable Rama is foolish. Instead, he devises a plan of cunning deception. He commands one of his demons, Maricha, to transform into a magical golden deer, its hide sparkling with precious gemstones. This enchanting creature begins to graze near Rama and Lakshmana's hermitage. When Sita sees it, she is utterly captivated, her heart filled with a sudden, intense longing. She pleads with Rama to capture the beautiful animal for her. Rama, ever eager to please his wife, agrees and sets off in pursuit, instructing Lakshmana to stand guard and protect Sita with his life. But the deer is elusive, leading Rama deep into the forest until finally he shoots it with an arrow. As it falls, the demon Maricha, in his dying moments, uses his magic to perfectly mimic Rama's own voice, crying out, "O Sita! O Lakshmana, help me!" The chilling scream echoes through the woods, reaching the anxious Sita back at the hut. Convinced her husband is in mortal danger, she is overcome with panic and insists that Lakshmana must go to his aid immediately. Lakshmana is torn. His orders were clear, but Sita's distress is unbearable. Before he reluctantly leaves, he draws a protective line in the earth around the perimeter of the hut and the entrance, a boundary known as the Lakshmana Rekha. He sternly warns Sita that no matter what happens, she must not, under any circumstances, step beyond this magical threshold. Now alone and vulnerable, Sita waits in agonizing suspense. It is at this precise moment that Ravana puts the final part of his scheme into action. Disguised as a gentle, elderly, wandering holy man, a sad he approaches the hut begging for alms. From the safety of her boundary, the compassionate Sita welcomes him and moves to offer him food. But the holy man insists that he cannot accept alms from across a line. She must come out and place the offering directly into his hands. This is the critical test of the Lakshmana Rekha. Torn between the strict command of her protector and the sacred duty of hospitality to a guest, a principle as important as any other in her dharma, Sita makes a fateful decision. Believing the old man to be harmless, she takes one step across the line. In that very instant, the illusion shatters. The frail Sadhu vanishes, and in his place stands the colossal, terrifying form of the 10-headed demon king, Ravana. He looms over her, his 20 arms outstretched. Before she can even scream, he seizes her, dragging her toward his celestial chariot, which had been hidden nearby. As the chariot ascends into the sky, Sita's courage erupts. She cries out for Rama, but she also begins to shed her jewels, dropping them piece by piece as clues for her husband to follow. She throws her scarf and ornaments down to a group of monkeys watching from a mountain peak below, a desperate act of hope that will prove crucial. Ravana carries her across the ocean to his impregnable island kingdom of Lanka, where he places her in a beautiful but heavily guarded garden of Ashoka trees. There he tries to win her over with promises of unimaginable wealth and power, offering her the position of his chief queen, but Sita's resolve is unbreakable. Her loyalty to Rama is the core of her being. She rejects his advances with scorn and dignity, choosing instead to sit beneath a single tree, wrapped in her virtue and her unwavering faith that her husband will find her and rescue her. The visual storytelling of this legend is as rich as its narrative. Imagine scenes inspired by the vibrant and intricate traditions of Indian miniature painting, such as those from the Muir or Kangra schools. We could see a stunning depiction of the golden deer, its form almost shimmering with ethereal light, captivating Sita against a lush green forest background. The moment of the abduction could be rendered with dramatic intensity. The frail Sadhu's form dissolving into the monstrous, multi-armed Ravana, his chariot a blaze of dark energy against the sky as Sita, a small figure of grace and defiance, drops her jewels like tears toward the earth. Later, the scene in the Ashoka Grove offers a powerful contrast, the opulent, golden city of Lanka in the background, with Sita seated humbly yet regally beneath a tree, surrounded by fierce, demonic female gods, her posture one of profound inner strength amidst unimaginable trial. The abduction of Sita is far more than a simple plot point in an ancient epic. It is the catalyst that sets in motion a cosmic confrontation between the forces of Dharma and Adharma, of righteous order and unbridled ego. It forces Rama to fully embody his destiny, not just as a prince in exile, but as a warrior king and ultimately as the seventh avatar of the great god Vishnu, who has descended to earth specifically to destroy the evil that Ravana represents. The event also highlights the profound agency of Sita herself. She is not a passive victim. Her unwavering loyalty becomes her power, her spiritual resistance an act of warfare as potent as any arrow Rama will fire. This one act of injustice summons an alliance of unlikely heroes, most famously the monkey god Hanuman, whose leap of faith across the ocean to find Sita will become a legend in its own right, setting the stage for a war that will rescue a queen, restore a kingdom, and reaffirm the eternal power of duty, love, and truth over the transient might of demons. Yet for all the epic wars and abductions orchestrated by gods and kings, sometimes the most devastating conflicts in history are sparked not by a grand declaration, but by a single, deliberate act of pettiness. This is the legend of the Judgment of Paris, a story that masterfully illustrates how the vain squabbles of the divine could set in motion a chain of events leading to the complete downfall of mortal civilizations. Our scene opens not on a battlefield but at a joyous and exclusive celebration, the wedding of the mortal hero Peleus to the beautiful sea nymph Thetis. This was a union of cosmic significance, for it was prophesied that their son would become a figure greater than his father, a prophecy that worried Zeus enough to arrange the marriage to a mortal, thereby diluting the potential threat. Every deity of Olympus was invited to feast on the slopes of Mount Pelion, all except for one, Ares, the goddess of strife and discord. Known for her troublesome nature, she was deliberately excluded, an act of social snubbing that would prove to be the most catastrophic mistake in all of Greek mythology. Furious at the insult, Ares devised a plan of exquisite, malicious simplicity. She did not storm the wedding or hurl thunderbolts. Instead, she crafted a single, perfect golden apple and with a swift, unseen hand, tossed it into the midst of the reveling gods. The apple bore a brief, incendiary inscription, "To the fairest." It landed gleaming among the goddesses, and instantly the music stopped. The inscription was a divine provocation, a question that demanded an answer and guaranteed conflict. Three powerful deities immediately stepped forward, each believing the title belonged to her alone. Hera, the majestic queen of the gods and the embodiment of royal power; Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of strategic warfare and wisdom; and Aphrodite, the irresistible goddess of love and beauty. Their argument was immediate and volatile. The celebration shattered into a divine shouting match, with none of the other gods daring to intervene and choose a favorite, knowing the wrath of the two losers would be unimaginable. The dispute festered, threatening to split Olympus itself until a solution was needed. Zeus, in his divine wisdom, or perhaps his divine cowardice, declared that the matter must be settled by an impartial judge. And he knew just the person, a young, handsome mortal prince named Paris, who was living as a shepherd on the slopes of Mount Ida near the great city of Troy. Paris's life was already a story of hidden royal lineage. As an infant, a prophecy foretold he would be the cause of Troy's destruction, and so he was abandoned on the mountainside to die. He was rescued and raised by shepherds, growing into a strong and charismatic youth, oblivious to his true parentage. It was in this pastoral solitude that the divine messenger Hermes suddenly appeared, leading the three most powerful goddesses in the world. Hermes explained the task. Paris was to examine the three and award the golden apple to the one he deemed the most beautiful. To ensure a fair judgment, the goddesses were presented to him not in their full, overwhelming divine glory, but in forms he could behold without being incinerated. Yet, even in this diminished state, their presence was staggering. They did not, however, rely on their beauty alone. Each approached the young prince and, in a moment that defines the very nature of temptation, offered him a bribe tailored to her domain. Hera, as Queen of Olympus, went first. She offered him power on a scale few mortals could imagine. She promised him political dominion over all of Asia, making him the richest and most powerful king in the known world, a ruler whose name would echo through the ages for his conquests and wealth. Next came Athena, clad in the armor of a general. She offered him wisdom and victory. She promised him unparalleled skill in battle, the mind of a great strategist, and the glory of being the greatest warrior who ever lived, ensuring his fame would be earned through his own intellect and courage. Finally, Aphrodite approached. She did not speak of kingdoms or battles. With a knowing smile, she simply loosened her gown and offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the entire world. She promised him Helen of Sparta, a woman whose face was said to have launched 1,000 ships. For a young shepherd, isolated from the complexities of royal politics and the horrors of war, the choice was profoundly human. Power was an abstract concept. Wisdom and glory required arduous effort. But the love of the most beautiful woman was an immediate, tangible, and deeply personal desire. Paris, without further hesitation, handed the golden apple to Aphrodite. In that single moment, the fate of the ancient world was sealed. Hera and Athena, humiliated and enraged, turned their immortal fury not just on Paris, but on his entire city and all its people. They would become the eternal enemies of Troy, plotting its ruin from that day forward. Aphrodite, true to her word, set about fulfilling her part of the bargain. She guided Paris to Sparta, where he was a guest in the palace of King Menelaus, Helen's husband. With Aphrodite's magic clouding Helen's mind and stirring her passions, Paris persuaded her, or in some versions abducted her, and sailed with her back to Troy. This act of betrayal and theft was the final, unforgivable insult. Menelaus, his honor shattered, called upon all the kings and heroes of Greece who had once sworn an oath to protect his marriage. They answered the call, gathering a colossal armada under the command of Menelaus's brother, the powerful Agamemnon. Thus began the Trojan War, a decade-long siege that would consume countless lives, topple heroes like Achilles and Hector, and ultimately lead to the fiery annihilation of the magnificent city of Troy itself, all because a shepherd prince, tasked with judging a beauty contest, chose the promise of love over the gifts of power and wisdom. To visualize this pivotal moment, we can turn to the rich tradition of classical art, where the judgment of Paris was a favorite subject. Paintings from the Renaissance and Baroque periods, like the works of Peter Paul Rubens or Claude Lorraine, capture the scene with lush drama. They show the idyllic landscape of Mount Ida, with the muscular figure of Paris seated, often looking overwhelmed as the three goddesses in various states of undress present themselves to him. Hermes often stands by, a celestial intermediary in this fateful transaction. To understand the geopolitical scale of the consequence, a map of the ancient Aegean is essential. It shows the vast distance between Sparta in mainland Greece and Troy in Asia Minor, highlighting the immense journey of Paris and Helen and the even greater journey of the 1,000 ships that followed, a trail of violence and vengeance stretching across the wine-dark sea, all tracing back to a single, spiteful golden apple. But the Norse cosmos did not begin with gods in golden halls or even with a great world tree. It began in a yawning, silent void known as Ginnungagap, a gap of nothingness flanked by two elemental extremes. To the north lay Niflheim, a realm of ice, mist, and freezing fog from which flowed 11 venomous rivers. To the south was Muspelheim, a world of fire, sparks, and molten light, guarded by the fire giant Surtur with his flaming sword. For ages, these two forces existed in separation, until the creeping ice of Niflheim met the radiating heat of Muspelheim in the center of the Great Void. The ice began to melt, and from the dripping rime stirred by this cosmic warmth, life was formed. The first being to emerge was not a god but a giant. His name was Ymir, the primordial frost giant, and he was a hermaphroditic entity, a being of pure, chaotic potential. As he slept, more giants spawned from the sweat of his armpits and the friction of his legs, a grotesque and spontaneous generation that populated the void with the forces of chaos. But Ymir was not alone. From the same melting ice, another form took shape, Audhumla, a colossal, nourishing cow. Her milk provided 4 rivers of sustenance for Ymir, while she herself licked the salty, ice-covered blocks of rime. After 3 days of licking, she freed another being from the ice. This was Beri, the first of the gods, handsome and powerful. Beri had a son named Bor, who in turn married a giantess named Bisla. Their union produced 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Vi. This set the stage for a conflict of cosmic proportions, a battle between the new, conscious order of the gods and the old, unconscious chaos of the primal giant. The young gods, Odin and his brothers, grew strong and resolute. They looked upon the chaotic, sprawling form of Ymir and the brutish giants that teemed from him and saw a future of endless, mindless conflict. They understood that for a stable, structured world to exist, the primordial chaos had to be subdued and transformed. And so, in an act of foundational violence, the 3 brothers banded together and slew the great giant Ymir. The descriptions in the poetic Edda are visceral and unflinching. The blood that flowed from Ymir's wounds was not a trickle, it was a cataclysm. It surged forth in a torrent so immense that it drowned nearly all of the other frost giants, swamping the void with a deluge of primal matter. Only 2 giants, Bergelmir and his wife, managed to escape the flood by climbing into a hollowed-out tree trunk, an ark that preserved their lineage and ensured the eternal enmity between giants and gods would continue. With a chaotic progenitor slain, the real work of creation could begin. The gods did not create from nothing. They recycled, they repurposed, they imposed order on the mammoth corpse that lay before them. They dragged Ymir's colossal body into the center of Ginnungagap and began the great work of world building, using every part of the giant as raw material for a new, structured cosmos. Imagine an animated sequence that brings this incredible act of creation to life, a visual symphony of cosmic butchery and divine architecture. We would see the 3 gods, Odin, Vili, and Vi, standing as tiny figures upon the mountainous corpse of the slain giant. With immense effort, they begin to pull and shape his flesh, stretching it out across the void until it forms the solid ground of Midgard, the world of humanity. His uncoagulated blood is not merely poured out, it is channeled and contained, becoming the vast oceans, the winding rivers, and every lake and sea that would ever exist. The great bones of the giant are torn from his body and piled high, becoming the soaring mountains and the jagged cliffs that define the landscape. His teeth and the fragments of his shattered bones become the stones and pebbles that litter the earth. Then, in a stroke of brilliant cosmic engineering, the gods lift Ymir's enormous skull. They do not discard it, they position it high above the new earth, its concave dome forming the very sky itself, a great bowl inverted over the world. Inside this skull dome, they take the scattered, wandering sparks and embers from the fiery realm of Muspelheim and set them in place, creating the sun, the moon, and all the constellations of the stars, fixed lights to guide the seasons and illuminate the day and night. What remained of the giant's brain was tossed high into the air inside this skull, where it scattered and became the ever-shifting clouds. Even his eyebrows were used, fashioned into a protective barrier, a fortress wall that would encircle the newly created world of Midgard and separate it from the untamed wilds of Jotunheim, the land of the giants. This creation myth is profoundly different from many others found across the globe. It is not a story of a benevolent deity speaking the world into existence from a void of nothingness. Instead, it is a story of world building through conflict, dismemberment, and recycling. The Norse cosmos is literally built from the body of a murdered ancestor, a being of chaos. This reflects a worldview where order is not a default state, but a hard-won achievement wrested from a violent and often hostile universe. Life and structure emerge directly from an act of sacrifice, in this case, a forced sacrifice, and the death of one form of being gives life to all others. The world is not separate from the divine or the primal, it is made of them. The earth is the flesh of a giant, the sea is his blood, and the sky is his skull. This creates an intimate, almost grim connection between the physical world and its origins. Every mountain is a bone, every stormy sea a reminder of the great slaughter that made life possible. This narrative also establishes a recurring theme in Norse mythology. The gods are not all-powerful creators outside of time. They are actors within a pre-existing cosmos, and their power is often demonstrated through cleverness, strength, and a willingness to engage in necessary, brutal acts to shape their reality. The creation from Ymir's body sets the tone for the entire Norse cycle. A world born from conflict is a world that will always be under threat, a world that will one day face its own destruction in Ragnarok, only to be reborn once more from the fragments of the old. From the grand, world-shattering narratives of cosmic creation and epic wars, we now turn to the figures who operate in the shadows and whispers, the agents of chaos who prove that the most profound changes can be sparked not by a thunderbolt, but by a clever lie or a selfish prank. These are the divine tricksters, and in two vastly different cultures, they take center stage, revealing that chaos and cunning are universal forces in the human imagination. In the cold, fatalistic halls of the Norse Pantheon, we have the complex and ultimately destructive Loki. Far beyond his monstrous children, his presence is a constant, unpredictable current in the streams of fate, a god who creates the problems he is then forced to solve. One of his most telling escapades begins with a moment of pure, malicious mischief. The goddess Sif, wife of the mighty Thor, was renowned for her magnificent golden hair, which shimmered like a field of ripe wheat and was a symbol of fertility and vitality. While her husband was away, Loki, for reasons known only to him, perhaps simple boredom or a spark of envy, slipped into her chamber as she slept and sheared off every single lock. When Sif awoke and discovered the violation, her devastation was absolute. Thor's return was a storm of a different kind. His fury was immediate and terrifying. He seized Loki, his grip like iron, and promised to break every bone in the trickster's body. Loki, in a blind panic, swore an oath to make amends. He promised to travel to the realm of the dwarves, the master smiths, and procure for Sif a new head of hair, one made of real, living gold that would grow like natural hair. This desperate promise set in motion a chain of events that would enrich the entire pantheon, a classic example of how Loki's chaos inadvertently leads to divine advancement. He first went to the sons of Ivaldi, who forged not only the golden hair for Sif, but also Odin's legendary spear, Gungnir, which never missed its mark, and Skidbladnir, a magical ship for Freya that could fold up to fit in a pocket yet always found a fair wind. But Loki, ever competitive, then goaded another set of dwarf brothers, Brokkr and Sindri, into a wager, betting his own head that they could not craft gifts as fine. Working their forge with bellows and hammer, the dwarves created 3 masterpieces: Gullinbursti, a golden boar that could run across sky and sea faster than any horse; Draupnir, a golden ring that dripped 8 identical rings every 9th night; and most famously, Mjolnir, Thor's mighty hammer. Loki, fearing their success, transformed into a fly and bit Brokkr relentlessly at his forge, but the dwarf persevered, creating the hammer with one flaw: its handle was slightly short. The gods judged the gifts and, despite the short handle, declared Mjolnir the greatest treasure, for it was the ultimate defense of Asgard. Loki lost his bet, but through his silver tongue, he managed to save his head, though Brokkr sewed his lips shut as a punishment. This entire saga, from a petty act of cruelty to the acquisition of the gods' most powerful symbols of authority, showcases Loki's dual nature as a problem maker and a problem solver, a catalyst for both loss and gain. Yet this chaotic but ultimately productive mischief would ultimately curdle into something far darker, leading to Loki's most unforgivable transgression, his direct role in the death of the beloved god Balder. Balder the Beautiful was the son of Odin and Frigg, a god of light, purity, and joy, so cherished that all things in the world had sworn an oath to his mother never to harm him. The gods made a sport of this invulnerability, throwing weapons at Balder only to watch them harmlessly turn aside. It was a time of divine innocence and celebration, a moment of pure light in the grim Norse cosmos. Loki, consumed by bitterness and envy at Balder's adoration, could not bear it. Disguised as an old woman, he went to Frigg and cunningly asked if truly everything had sworn the oath. The unsuspecting Frigg revealed one small, seemingly insignificant exception: the mistletoe, a young plant she had deemed too harmless to demand an oath from. This was all Loki needed. He hurried to find the mistletoe and from its wood fashioned a sharp dart. He then sought out Balder's blind brother, Hodder, who was sadly standing apart from the merriment, unable to participate in the game. Loki, feigning kindness, placed the mistletoe dart in Hodder's hand and guided his aim. The dart flew, pierced Balder's heart, and the shining god fell dead, a shadow instantly falling over all the realms. This was no longer mischievous chaos. This was pure, calculated evil born from spite. For this act, the gods hunted Loki down and punished him in a manner as gruesome as his crime, binding him to a sharp rock with the entrails of his own son, while a serpent dripped venom onto his face, causing him to writhe in agony until the world's end. This final, cruel trick seals his fate, transforming him from a troublesome ally into the arch-nemesis of the gods, the father of the monsters who will lead the charge at Ragnarok. Half a world away, in the vibrant traditions of West Africa and the Caribbean, we find a trickster who operates with a very different purpose and spirit. This is Anansi, the spider god. Where Loki's chaos is often self-serving and destructive, Anansi's cunning is frequently directed toward a greater good, making him a classic culture hero for humanity. His most famous tale explains how wisdom and stories came to belong to all people, not just the gods. In the beginning, all the stories in the world were held by the sky god, Niamh, who kept them locked away in the heavens. Anansi, believing that these stories should be shared with everyone, went to Niamh and asked to buy them. The sky god, knowing Anansi's reputation, set a seemingly impossible price. To earn the stories, Anansi had to capture 4 of the most dangerous and elusive creatures: Anini, the giant python who could swallow a man whole; Asibo, the leopard with teeth like daggers and a roar that shook the forest; the Mmobro, a swarm of hornets with stings of fire; and Mmosha, a fairy spirit who was never seen. A lesser being would have given up, but Anansi's strength was not in his muscles but in his mind. He returned to the earth and began to weave his plans, not with webs of silk but with webs of deception. His capture of the python was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. He took a long pole and argued aloud with himself near where the python slept, debating whether the python was longer than the pole or the pole was longer than the python. Anini, hearing this, was intrigued and offered to stretch out alongside the pole to settle the argument. The moment the python was stretched out straight, Anansi quickly tied him to the pole, capturing him with his own pride. For the leopard, Anansi dug a deep pit and covered it with brush. When Asibo fell in, Anansi lowered a strong rope and convinced the leopard to tie it around his own tail to be pulled out. Once the leopard was suspended helplessly in the air, Anansi had him completely at his mercy. To capture the hornets, he filled a calabash with water and poured some over a leaf above their nest, calling out that it was starting to rain. He then offered them the dry calabash as shelter. The entire swarm flew inside, and Anansi swiftly plugged the opening, trapping them. For the final spirit, he carved a wooden doll and covered its hand with sticky sap, then set a bowl of yams before it. When the fairy spirit came to eat the yams, she thanked the doll, who remained silent. Angered by the perceived rudeness, she slapped the doll and her hand stuck fast. She slapped it with her other hand and then kicked it until she was completely stuck and captured. Anansi delivered all 4 captives to Niame, who, true to his word, released all the stories to the spider. Anansi then brought them down to the human world, ensuring that from that day forward, stories and wisdom belonged to everyone. For animated segments, imagine the vibrant, colorful art style of African folk tales, with Anansi's clever plans visualized in a dynamic, almost playful way, highlighting the wit and humor of his victories over brute strength. When we place Loki and Anansi side by side, we see 2 faces of the same archetypal coin, yet polished to very different shines. Both are catalysts for change, shattering the status quo through their cunning. Both exist in a world of order, the strict hierarchy of Asgard, the powerful authority of Niame, and both use their wits to navigate and manipulate these systems. However, their moral alignment and ultimate impact diverge sharply. Loki's tricks are often driven by personal grievance, envy, or simple caprice. He cuts Sif's hair for no clear reason. He orchestrates Balder's death out of pure malice. His chaos, while sometimes leading to short-term gains for the gods, ultimately spirals outward into the cataclysm of Ragnarok, making him an agent of destruction whose legacy is one of betrayal and sorrow. Anansi, by contrast, is often a champion for the underdog, using his intelligence to outsmart larger, more powerful beings for a collective good. His goal in his most famous story is to bring the treasure of narrative to all of humanity. He is a culture hero, a symbol of how the weak can triumph over the strong through cleverness and resourcefulness. While he can be greedy and selfish in other tales, often trying to hoard food or avoid work, his foundational role is that of a benefactor. To truly capture their distinct tones, one could imagine a dramatic reading of the stark, foreboding verses from the poetic Edda that describe Loki's binding, the words cold and heavy with fate. This would stand in powerful contrast to the lively, rhythmic cadence of an Anansi story told aloud, full of repetition, song, and interactive call and response, pulling the audience into the web of the tale itself. Together, these 2 tricksters show us that chaos itself is a neutral force. It is the heart of the one who wields it that determines whether it will build a new world or burn an old one to the ground. Yet even a king who builds great walls cannot build a wall against grief. This profound and universal truth lies at the heart of humanity's oldest written epic, the story of Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. 2/3 god and 1/3 man, Gilgamesh possessed strength beyond measure, but his heart was that of a tyrant, his energy so boundless that he oppressed his own people, leaving no son with his father and no maiden for her mother. In response to their pleas, the gods created a match for him, a wild man named Enkidu, formed from clay by the mother goddess Aruru and set loose in the wilderness. Enkidu was brought to Uruk by a trapper and a temple priestess, and his first meeting with Gilgamesh was a colossal, street-shaking brawl. But from that violent clash, an unbreakable bond of friendship was forged. Together, the 2 heroes embarked on glorious adventures, most notably journeying to the distant cedar forest to confront and slay the monstrous demon Humbaba, a guardian appointed by the gods. This act of defiance, while cementing their fame, earned them divine disfavor. Later, when the goddess Ishtar, infatuated with Gilgamesh, offered herself to him, he rejected her with insults, recounting the grim fates of her previous lovers. In her towering rage, Ishtar demanded that her father, the sky god Anu, send the bull of heaven to punish Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought together and slaughtered the celestial beast, but their victory sealed their doom. The divine council decreed that one of the two must die for their transgressions, and the lot fell upon Enkidu. The death of Enkidu is one of the most moving and psychologically raw sequences in all of ancient literature. He does not die swiftly in battle, but is struck down by a debilitating, wasting sickness, a slow and agonizing descent that allows him to curse the trapper and the priestess who brought him to civilization, before finally blessing them as he reconciles with his fate. For 12 days, Gilgamesh watches his friend suffer, powerless to intervene. When Enkidu finally dies, Gilgamesh's reaction is one of all-consuming, primal despair. He circles his friend's body like a lioness robbed of her cubs, refusing to let anyone near until a maggot falls from the corpse. The sight shatters his denial and his grief erupts. He rips his royal robes, tears out his hair, and wanders the wilderness crying out in anguish. The death of his friend is more than a personal loss. It is a horrifying, first-hand revelation of his own mortality. If the mighty Enkidu, his equal in every way, could be reduced to cold, inert clay, then so could he. The terror of this knowledge consumes him, transforming his grief into a desperate, obsessive quest. He abandons his throne, his city, and his duties, setting out into the unknown with a single, burning purpose: to find Utnapishtim, the one mortal who was granted eternal life by the gods, and to learn from him the secret of how to cheat death. His journey takes him to the very edges of the known world, a symbolic descent into the landscape of his own fear. He first arrives at the double-peaked mountain of Mashu, the gateway where the sun rises and sets, guarded by terrifying scorpion beings. They warn him that no mortal has ever passed through the 12 leagues of utter darkness within, but Gilgamesh, driven by his terror, persuades them to let him enter. He travels through an abyss of blackness so complete he cannot see before or behind, a powerful metaphor for the bleakness of his grief, before finally emerging into a brilliant, jeweled garden. It is here he meets the alewife Siguri, a wise divine barmaid who lives by the shore of the sea. Seeing his ragged, wild-eyed state, she initially bars her door, mistaking him for a murderer. When he tells her his story and his quest, she offers him the first piece of profound wisdom. She advises him to abandon his futile search, telling him that the gods have allotted death to mankind and kept life for themselves. Her counsel is to savor the simple, mortal pleasures that are within his grasp. Fill your belly with good things, she says. Dance and be merry, feast and rejoice. Let your clothes be fresh, bathe yourself in water, cherish the little child that holds your hand, and let your wife delight in your embrace. This is a beautiful, humanistic philosophy that the meaning of life is found not in an endless duration, but in the depth and joy of our finite days. But Gilgamesh, still trapped in the raw trauma of his loss, cannot hear her. He dismisses her advice, insisting that his heart is too sick with grief for such pleasures, and demands to know the way to Utnapishtim. Seeing his resolve, Siguri reluctantly directs him to Urshanabi, the ferryman of Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh finds Urshanabi with a crew of stone men, and in his characteristic fury, he smashes the sacred stone ones, the very beings who were meant to help him cross the waters of death. This act of impulsive destruction is a brilliant character detail, showing that his divine strength is often his own worst enemy, breaking the very tools that could aid him. Urshanabi informs him that the stone ones were essential for the journey, as a mortal hand cannot touch the lethal waters. He instructs Gilgamesh to cut 300 punting poles and to use each one only once, pushing against the bottom before discarding it to avoid contaminating himself. This laborious, meticulous task forces the impatient king into a state of purposeful action, a necessary penance for his rashness. When they finally arrive at the distant shore, Gilgamesh meets the ancient, immortal Utnapishtim, who looks upon the haggard king with curiosity, noting that he resembles a god but is clad in the skins of animals and worn out with sorrow. Gilgamesh poses his desperate question directly. How was it that you, a mortal, entered the assembly of the gods and found eternal life? Utnapishtim's answer is not a simple secret, but the recounting of the Great Flood, a narrative that predates and strikingly parallels the later biblical story of Noah. He tells Gilgamesh how the gods, led by Enlil, decided to destroy the noisy, overpopulated human race with a deluge. But the god E, Lord of Wisdom, secretly warned Utnapishtim, instructing him to build a massive cubical boat to seal it with bitumen and to bring his family, skilled craftsmen, and the seed of all living creatures aboard. Utnapishtim obeyed, and when the tempest came, it was so terrifying that even the gods themselves cowered in fear and wept at the destruction they had unleashed. After the boat came to rest on a mountain and the waters receded, Utnapishtim offered a sacrifice whose sweet smell drew the starving gods like flies. Enlil was initially enraged to find survivors, but he argued for wisdom and mercy, convincing the gods that punishment should be proportionate, not absolute. As a reward for preserving life, the gods granted Utnapishtim and his wife the gift of immortality. The point of this long story is devastatingly clear to Gilgamesh. His quest is impossible. Utnapishtim's immortality was a unique, one-time gift from the gods for a specific cosmic service. It is not a prize that can be sought or earned through mere determination. There is no secret to be learned. The door to eternal life is closed. Yet, moved by pity, Utnapishtim offers Gilgamesh one final, fragile hope. He tells the king of a plant that grows at the bottom of the sea, a thorny plant whose name is "The Old Man Becomes a Young Man." It does not grant immortality, but it does offer rejuvenation, a return of youthful vigor. This is a profound compromise, a potential answer to the fear of decay and decline that underlies the fear of death. Reinvigorated, Gilgamesh ties heavy stones to his feet, plunges into the abyssal waters, and retrieves the miraculous plant. His joy is palpable. He plans to take it back to Uruk to test it on an old man first, and then share it with all his people, transforming his personal quest into a gift for his entire city. This shift marks the beginning of his return to his kingly duties, a sign that he is emerging from his solipsistic grief. But the universe and the laws of the gods are not so easily cheated. On the journey home, while stopping to bathe at a cool spring, Gilgamesh lays the precious plant on the shore. In that unguarded moment, a serpent, drawn by its scent, slithers up and steals the plant. As it consumes the thorny prize, it immediately sheds its old skin, emerging renewed and youthful, while Gilgamesh can only watch in utter horror and despair. He sits down and weeps, his bitter tears flowing for the loss of this last fleeting chance. The serpent's theft is one of the most iconic and symbolic moments in world mythology, explaining both the serpent's ability to shed its skin as a form of rebirth and, more importantly, delivering the final, inescapable lesson: mortality is the definitive human condition. Even the possibility of reversing its effects is forever out of reach. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk a changed man. He is not the same brash tyrant who left, nor is he the broken wanderer who sought an impossible prize. He has been humbled by his journey and his failure, but he has also been enlightened. He asks his companion Urshanabi to walk with him and admire the mighty, sun-baked walls of his city, the foundations of which he had laid. His final words in the epic are an invitation to behold the magnificence of Uruk, its brickwork and its 7 bold gates. This is not a resignation to despair, but a quiet, hard-won triumph. He has accepted that his legacy will not be an eternal life for his body, but the enduring life of his achievements, the city, the walls, the laws, the civilization he built. His immortality would be found in memory and in story, in the very epic that we are recounting now, preserved for millennia on fragile clay tablets. To visualize this powerful journey, one could show detailed close-ups of ancient cuneiform tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal, the wedge-shaped script telling this timeless story. We could see sweeping cinematic shots of the reconstructed ziggurats and mud brick walls of ancient Uruk against a vast Mesopotamian sky, and a poignant animation of the fateful moment the serpent, a creature of the earth, slithers away with the plant of rejuvenation, leaving the hero empty-handed but finally truly wise. The Epic of Gilgamesh endures because it is the first and one of the most profound explorations of what it means to be human, to love, to lose, to rage against the dying of the light, and to ultimately find meaning not in a futile fight against the inevitable, but in the enduring works we create with the precious, limited time we are given. From the intimate grief of Gilgamesh and the individual cunning of tricksters, we now widen our gaze to the ultimate scale of divine conflict, the great wars in heaven that forged the very pantheons we have been exploring. These are not the quarrels of a single god, but the foundational wars that decided which family of deities would hold the scepter of cosmic power. And when we place the two most epic of these struggles side by side, the Greek Titanomachy and the Norse Aesir-Vanir War, we see a stunning divergence in how these ancient cultures conceived of conflict, resolution, and the very nature of authority itself. We have already witnessed the brutal, world-shattering drama of the Titanomachy, the 10-year war where Zeus and his Olympian siblings overthrew the tyrannical rule of their father, Cronus, and the ancient race of Titans. It is a story of clear-cut usurpation, a generational conflict where the new order must violently supplant the old. The Titans, led by figures like Atlas and Menoetius, represented a primordial, raw, and often chaotic power. Their defeat was absolute, with the mighty weapons forged by the Cyclops, the Thunderbolt, the Trident, and the Helm of Darkness. The Olympians waged a war of annihilation. The final victory was not a negotiation but a total conquest. The defeated Titans were rounded up, cast into the bleak abyss of Tartarus, and placed under eternal guard. The world was then neatly divided by lot among the three brothers. Zeus took the sky and became king, Poseidon claimed the seas, and Hades received the underworld. This conflict established a strict, vertical hierarchy on Mount Olympus. Power was centralized, and a single, patriarchal ruler now sat at the head of a clear divine government. The Titanomachy is a myth about the triumph of order over chaos, but it is an order enforced through overwhelming force and the establishment of an unchallenged chain of command. The old gods are not integrated, they are imprisoned. The new regime is built upon their utter defeat. Now, let us journey to the mists of the Norse cosmos, to a conflict that unfolds with a very different rhythm and resolution. This is the Aesir-Vanir War, a struggle not between generations, but between two distinct tribes of gods who represented complementary yet conflicting spheres of influence. The Aesir were the gods we most commonly associate with the Norse pantheon deities like Odin, Thor, and Tyr. They were gods of sovereignty, law, warfare, and cosmic power, ruling from their celestial fortress of Asgard. The Vanir, on the other hand, were deities of a different nature. This tribe included Njord, the god of the sea, wind, and wealth, his son Freya, the god of fertility, sunshine, and rain, and his daughter Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, magic, and war. The Vanir were deeply connected to the earth, to fertility, to Sadom magic, and the cycles of nature. The causes of the war are shrouded in the mists of time, but it seems to have been a clash of cultures and domains. The Aesir, with their focus on order and battle, came into conflict with the Vanir, whose power was rooted in the fertile, unpredictable forces of the earth. Unlike the one-sided rebellion of the Titanomachy, this was a war between equals, a long and bitter stalemate where neither side could gain a decisive upper hand. Both pantheons were devastatingly powerful, and the conflict dragged on, draining both sides. The resolution, therefore, could not be one of total victory. Exhausted, the Aesir and Vanir did something remarkably pragmatic. They sued for peace. To seal their truce, they did what all parties in a profound agreement must do. They spat into a great vessel. This was not an act of disgust, but a powerful, ancient symbol of merging their very essences. From this collective spittle, a being was formed, Kvasir, the wisest of all beings, born from the shared substance of both tribes. But the truce went even further. To ensure lasting peace, they exchanged hostages. This was a common practice in the ancient human world, a way to build trust and intertwine the fates of two formerly warring factions. The Vanir sent their most prominent members to live among the Aesir, the wise Njord and his twin children, Freya and Freyja. In return, the Aesir sent Hrungnir, a god known for his imposing stature and beauty, and the wise Mimir. This exchange was meant to create a synthesis, a blending of the two pantheons into a unified whole. The Vanir deities were not conquered, they were incorporated, bringing their essential powers of fertility and magic into the halls of Asgard. Freyja, for instance, would go on to teach the Aesir the secrets of Seda magic, a form of power previously associated primarily with the Vanir. However, the peace was not without its tensions. The Aesir eventually beheaded Mimir, and the Vanir felt deceived by Hrungnir, but the fundamental union held. The war ended not with a victor and a vanquished, but with a merger. The contrast between these two cosmic wars could not be more revealing of the cultures that spawned them. The Greek Titanomachy reflects a worldview that values clear hierarchy, decisive victory, and the establishment of an unchallengeable order. It is a myth that would resonate with a society that built city-states with defined laws and celebrated heroic conquest. The new king, Zeus, rules from on high, and the old forces are locked away, a tidy solution to the problem of chaos. The Norse Aesir-Vanir War, however, presents a much more nuanced and realistic view of conflict. It acknowledges that some struggles cannot be won by utter destruction of the opponent, but must be resolved through negotiation, exchange, and integration. The world is not made safe by imprisoning the forces of nature and fertility. It is made whole by incorporating them. The Vanir's power is not evil or chaotic. It is simply different, and it is necessary for a complete and functioning cosmos. This synthesis reflects a worldview that understands the complexity of power, where sovereignty must be balanced with fertility, and where law must make room for magic. To truly bring the epic scale and distinct tone of these conflicts to life, imagine a side-by-side animation sequence. On one side, we could see the Titanomachy in all its classical, sun-drenched fury. Visualize Zeus, a towering figure of marble-like musculature, hurling a thunderbolt that splits the sky, while Poseidon drives his trident into the earth, causing continents to crack. The Titans would be depicted as vast, elemental beings of rock and storm, their defeat a cataclysm of falling mountains and divine lightning. On the other side, the Aesir-Vanir War would have a different, more somber and mystical aesthetic. Picture Odin in his cloak and wide-brimmed hat, leading a shield wall of Aesir warriors against a Vanir force that seems to rise from the very soil and sea. Freya might be seen summoning fields of grain to entangle his foes, while Freyja, in her falcon cloak, commands unseen forces. The climax would not be a scene of utter defeat, but the powerful, symbolic moment of the spit vessel, with the two tribes mingling their essences to create something new, a moment of tense diplomacy rather than triumphant violence. This visual juxtaposition would perfectly capture the core difference. One war is a revolution that ends in a new monarchy. The other is a merger that creates a stronger, more diverse corporate board of gods. These foundational myths show us that how a culture tells the story of its god's greatest conflict reveals everything about how that culture believes power should be won, wielded, and most importantly, shared. And so we arrive at the final, inevitable chapter in the Norse cycle, the prophecy that casts a long and magnificent shadow over every triumph and tragedy we have witnessed. This is Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a destiny so certain that every action taken to avert it only serves to tighten its grip. It begins not with a bang, but with a chilling, unending silence. The first portent is the Fimbulwinter, a great winter that spans 3 years without a summer's reprieve. The sun and moon grow dim and pallid in the sky, their light choked by relentless blizzards. The world is locked in a frozen fist. Brother turns against brother for a crust of bread, and all bonds of kinship and honor are shattered in the desperate struggle for survival. This is the unmaking of society, a prelude to the unmaking of the cosmos itself. In this deepening gloom, the bonds of fate, both literal and figurative, begin to snap. The great wolf Fenrir, who has strained for ages against the magical fetter Gleipnir, finally breaks free, his howls of long-pent rage now echoing across the realms. On his sharp rock, Loki too shakes off his torment, his body writhing until the entrails that bind him tear asunder. From the depths of the ocean, the Midgard serpent Jormungandr stirs, its colossal coils churning the seas into a frenzy, causing tidal waves to crash over the land as it begins its slow, terrible journey toward the final battlefield. It is Heimdall, the ever-vigilant watchman of Asgard, who sees the cataclysm unfolding. Standing at the edge of the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, he puts the mighty Gjallarhorn to his lips and sounds a single, mournful note that cuts through the chaos. Its call is a lament and a summons, a sound that reverberates through every tree root of Yggdrasil and is heard in the deepest cavern and the highest hall. The gods, knowing their hour has come, don their battle gear for the last time. The Einherjar, the slain warriors who have feasted and trained in Valhalla for this very day, march forth from the 540 doors of Odin's hall. There forms a river of polished steel and grim determination, flowing toward the field of Vigrid. This vast plain, whose name means battle surge, becomes the stage for the final act. From every direction, the forces of chaos converge. Loki steers a ship from the east, Naglfar, its hull constructed entirely from the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the dead, carrying a horde of frost giants. From the south comes Surtur, the fire giant from Muspelheim, wreathed in flames so intense they outshine the sun, a blazing sword in his hand that scorches the very heavens. And from the swirling mist of Hel, a legion of the dishonored dead, led by Loki's daughter Hel herself, joins the grim procession. On the field of Vigrid, destinies written long ago are fulfilled in a series of epic, fatal duels. Odin, the All-Father, rides to meet his prophesied doom. He is clad in his golden eagle helmet and bears his spear Gungnir, but his face is grim with foreknowledge. He charges directly at the great wolf Fenrir, whose jaws are now so vast they stretch from the earth to the sky. In a single, horrifying motion, the wolf snaps those jaws shut, and the king of the gods is consumed. It is the ultimate sacrifice, the price of wisdom and power paid in full, but vengeance is swift. Odin's son, Vidar, the god of silent resolve, steps forward. Placing one foot on the wolf's lower jaw, his shoe crafted from all the leather scraps humanity has ever discarded, he seizes the beast's upper jaw and, with a surge of immense strength, tears the monster apart from mouth to tail, avenging his father in a single, brutal act of filial duty. Elsewhere on the field, Thor, the protector of Midgard, faces his ancient nemesis, the world serpent Jormungandr. The thunder god swings Mjolnir with all his might, striking the serpent's head with a blow that shakes the foundations of the cosmos. The serpent thrashes in its death throes, drenching Thor in a torrent of venom. The god stumbles away, taking 9 steps before the potent poison overcomes his divine constitution, and he too falls dead, his hammer still clutched in his hand. Meanwhile, the noble Freya, god of peace and fertility, confronts the fire giant Surtur. This is a tragically uneven match, for Freya had once given away his magical sword to win the heart of his beloved Gerda. Now, armed only with an antler, he fights bravely but is swiftly cut down by Surtur's blazing weapon. And in a clash of bitter rivals, Loki, the architect of so much sorrow, finally faces Heimdall, the guardian of order. They are two sides of a broken coin, and their fight is one of pure, distilled animosity. They trade blow for blow until, in a final, simultaneous strike, each falls slain by the other. With the major gods fallen, Surtur unleashes the fullness of his power. He sweeps his fiery sword across the world, and the flames leap hungrily. The great world tree Yggdrasil itself groans as its trunk is scorched. The rainbow bridge Bifrost shatters into a million glowing shards. The earth, consumed by fire, cracks and crumbles, sinking beneath the boiling waves of the sea. The stars wink out of existence, and darkness and silence reign once more over the gaping void of Ginnungagap. It is the end of all things, yet this is not the final word in the Norse vision. For from the ashes and the receding waters, a new world emerges, green and beautiful, rising from the sea. This renewed earth is fertile and peaceful, washed clean of the old conflicts. A handful of gods survive the conflagration. Odin's son Vidar and his brother Voli are there, along with Thor's sons Modi and Magni, who inherit their father's mighty hammer Mjolnir. Most importantly, Balder the Beautiful and his blind brother Hodder, reconciled, return from the land of the dead to inhabit this new world, their presence a promise of innocence restored. And from the depths of Yggdrasil, hidden within the wood of the world tree during the destruction, two human survivors emerge, Lif and Lifthrasir, meaning life and life-desirer. They will repopulate this fresh, green earth, beginning the cycle of humanity anew. To visualize this ultimate legend, imagine a cinematic sequence of breathtaking scope. We could see the Fimbulwinter's endless night, the ice cracking as Fenrir breaks free. The field of Vigrid would be a chaotic tapestry of clashing titans, with Odin's death and Vidar's vengeance rendered in stark, powerful detail. The world's end would be a symphony of fire and water, a cataclysm of overwhelming scale, followed by a profound, peaceful silence. And finally, the camera would pull back to reveal the new world, a single green shoot pushing up through rich, dark soil, as Lif and Lifthrasir step forward into the dawn of a second chance, a powerful testament to the enduring Norse belief that even from total destruction, life and hope are destined to begin again. And so our monumental journey reaches its end, a voyage that has carried us across continents and through millennia, from the golden halls of Asgard to the sun-baked temples of Egypt, from the cosmic churning of the ocean to the intimate grief of a mother for her daughter. We have witnessed 30 epic legends, each a universe of meaning in its own right. And yet, as we stand back and behold this vast tapestry, certain profound and universal threads begin to emerge, weaving these disparate cultures into a single, grand conversation about existence itself. One of the most powerful themes echoing through every pantheon is the eternal struggle between order and chaos. We saw it in the thunderous victory of Zeus over the Titans, in Marduk's heroic slaying of the primordial Tiamat to fashion a structured world, and in Ra's nightly, desperate battle against the serpent Apep to ensure the sun would rise again. This was not just a conflict of gods, it was our ancestors' way of explaining the fragile nature of their own world, where civilization was a hard-won fortress constantly besieged by the unpredictable forces of nature, war, and dissolution. Running parallel to this great struggle is the recurring motif of the immense price required for power and wisdom. Odin did not simply inherit his knowledge, he paid for it with his own eye and endured 9 nights of agonizing self-sacrifice on the world tree. The Aztec sun god Tonatiuh would not move across the sky without the ultimate offering of human blood, a sobering reminder that cosmic order demands a terrible toll. Prometheus stole fire for humanity and was condemned to an eternity of torment for his compassion, while Gilgamesh, in his quest for eternal life, learned that the greatest wisdom is the acceptance of mortality itself. These stories teach us that nothing of true value comes without cost, a lesson that resonates deeply with our own human experiences of sacrifice and growth. And from this costly wisdom springs the understanding of the great cycle, the unending wheel of death and rebirth. The story of Osiris, dismembered and resurrected to rule the afterlife, directly mirrored the annual flooding and renewal of the Nile, giving hope to an entire civilization. The myth of Demeter and Persephone explained the very turning of the seasons, a mother's grief casting the world into winter and her joy bringing forth the spring. Even the cataclysmic end of Ragnarok was not a final period, but a semicolon, followed by a green and peaceful world rising from the sea, with the beloved Balder returning and a new human couple, Lif and Lifthrasir, ready to begin the story of humanity anew. Perhaps the most complex thread of all is the intricate and often fraught relationship between the gods and humanity. In some tales, we are cherished creations, molded with care by a benevolent figure like Prometheus, who risked everything to elevate us. In others, like the Mesopotamian myth of Atrahasis, we are divine afterthoughts, created as laborers to bear the yoke so the gods could rest. We are the cause of divine wars, the objects of heavenly affection, and the recipients of both terrible wrath and profound compassion. These legends were far more than simple entertainment around a fire. They were the foundational frameworks through which ancient people made sense of their world. They explained the rising and setting sun, the changing seasons, the capriciousness of weather, and the mystery of death. They provided models for social order, for kingship, for justice, and for the sacred duties of family and community. They explored the deepest questions of the human condition. Why do we suffer? What is our purpose? Is there life after death? How should we live? These 30 stories are a testament to the boundless creativity and profound spiritual yearning of our species. They remind us that while the names of the gods may change, Odin, Zeus, Vishnu, Ra, the fundamental mysteries they sought to unravel are the very same ones we ponder today. We still look to the stars and wonder about our place in the cosmos. We still struggle to find order in the chaos of our lives. We still understand that growth often requires sacrifice, and that after every ending there is the potential for a new beginning. This shared mythological heritage is a bridge connecting us to every human who has ever looked up at the night sky in awe and asked, "What does it all mean?" Now we turn this immense conversation over to you. After this incredible journey through the epic legends of the divine pantheon, we are deeply curious to know which story resonated most deeply with you. Was it the heartbreaking devotion of Isis, the cunning brilliance of Anansi, the world-shattering rage of Shiva, or the profound acceptance of Gilgamesh? Share your own favorite myth from any culture in the world in the comments below. Tell us why it moves you, what it teaches you, and let's continue this exploration together, building a community bound by a shared sense of wonder for the timeless stories that have shaped who we are. But perhaps the most profound legacy of these myths is not found in our libraries or our movie theaters, but deep within the architecture of our own minds. In the early 20th century, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung proposed a radical idea: that these ancient gods and heroes were not merely fictional characters, but manifestations of what he called the collective unconscious. He suggested that just as our bodies have inherited a common physical structure from our ancestors, our psyches have inherited a common set of psychological blueprints. These universal, inborn patterns are the archetypes, and we see them vividly personified in the divine pantheons. The powerful, often distant father figure who establishes law and order is the archetype of the king, seen in Zeus and Odin. The nurturing, life-giving, and sometimes fiercely protective mother is the Great Mother, embodied by Isis and Demeter. The quest for identity and the struggle against monstrous challenges is the journey of the hero, a path walked by Hercules and Gilgamesh. The unpredictable, chaotic, and boundary-breaking force that disrupts the status quo is the archetypal trickster, a role perfectly filled by Loki and Anansi. Jung believed that these stories have endured for millennia not because they are simply entertaining, but because they are psychologically true. They map the territories of our own inner world, giving form to the universal struggles we all face. The search for our place in the world, the confrontation with our own shadows, the integration of our masculine and feminine energies, and the ultimate quest for meaning and wholeness. When we feel a rebellious spark against authority, we are touching the spirit of Prometheus. When we are consumed by grief that darkens our world, we are walking in the shoes of Demeter. These myths provide a symbolic language for the most complex and ineffable experiences of the human soul, offering a framework for understanding our own lives that feels both ancient and deeply personal. So as we conclude this epic journey through 30 legends of the divine pantheon, let us not see them as dusty artifacts locked away in a museum of forgotten beliefs. They are living, breathing narratives that continue to pulse through the veins of our modern world. They have given us the words to speak, the images to create, and the stories to tell. More importantly, they have given us a mirror in which to see ourselves, reflecting our deepest fears, our greatest aspirations, and our eternal search for meaning in a vast and mysterious cosmos. These tales of gods and goddesses, of monsters and heroes, are ultimately tales about us. They are the original stories, the ones we have been telling ourselves since the dawn of consciousness. And as long as we continue to look up at the stars and wonder, they will remain an essential